Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto became the Sharingan prince of the Uchiha clan, and Fem Itachi, Hinata, Ino, Tamari, Tenten and Yugito fell for him part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. The two blondes stood face to face, one looking tall and confident, and the other looking as if merely standing was becoming a struggle. Naruto's arms were hanging limply at his sides as he desperately gasped for air. Yugito, on the other hand, had one hand rested comfortably on her hip as she yawned mockingly. I almost feel bad, killing you as you are now, Yugito taunted. Had your condition been any better, I'm sure you would have put up quite a fight. That is, if you're as skilled as people say you are. Naruto wasn't sure what was going on with him, but it was quite clear that merely hearing that voice in his mind was enough to completely ravage his body, almost like an invasive toxin. He was unsure why it had such an effect on him, but he was sure of one thing: such a voice was not meant to be heard by human ears. You were sent by Kumogakure? Naruto asked after managing to get his breathing under control. Yugito nodded, clearly proud of her village. That's right, filth. You humiliated Lord Raikage, so you should have expected retribution. All I did was save a 3-year-old girl from being kidnapped, Naruto countered tiredly. If your Raikage is the type of person to order such a thing, then you'd have to be morally bankrupt to serve him at all. What does that say about you then? Yugito frowned upon hearing his point. Her nails and teeth both elongated, and Naruto could practically feel the powerful chakra radiating from her body. Naruto activated his Sharingan, which allowed him to get a better view of her chakra as a whole. It was potent, and while not as vast in quantity as his own, it reminded him of someone he knew. You're a Jinchuriki? Naruto asked calmly, only causing Yugito to get even more aggravated. I'm Yugito ni. She spat in response before her chakra flared to even greater proportions, distorting her voice. And I've had enough talking for today. Immediately after finishing, she blurred out of sight in a flash of speed. Naruto's Sharingan allowed him to see enough of her movements, which allowed him to dodge just in time. As he slid back in the other direction, he took note of her nails. They were now nearly a foot long in length, and glistened in the moonlight like razor-sharp knives. With every second her chakra grew more and more powerful, as did her fury. It soon became clear that there was no reasoning with a person like this, and despite his harrowing physical condition, he would need to dig in his heels and fight. Right as he finished that thought, she blurred in speed once more, though this time it was much faster than before. He then felt his ribs creak as if on the brink of snapping as he was hit with a vicious kick. The force of the strike was so great that he was actually sent flying into the stone wall of one of the nearby buildings, knocking the wind out of his lungs. Not an Uzumaki for nothing though, Naruto was quick to rise from his precarious position and avoid a falling axe kick that actually left cracks in the street below. Looking at his once very beautiful opponent, he noted that she now looked as if she were possessed. Her face was contorted in inhuman fury, and her eyes belayed almost barbaric psychopathy. You're good at running, she shrieked before disappearing in speed once more. He saw nothing. As he waited for the inevitable pain, he cursed himself. Years of training had brought him to this point, and despite it all, he still found himself facing an opponent that was overmatching him. To be fair to himself, he was quite literally half her age, and unlike her, he wasn't capable of using the power of a Biju, but still. His instincts screamed at him, and he looked to his right to see his opponent preparing to kill him, with her blade-like nails poised to pierce through his skull. He had always thought it was ridiculous when people in stories lamented about seeing their lives flash before their eyes before death. However, now, a part of him understood. Except in this moment, in this brief instant of time, all he could think about was the promises he had made throughout his life. As the killing blow inched toward him, he was finally able to see. It wasn't that she appeared any slower, rather, in the subtle movements in which she exerted her strength, he was vividly able to see an image of her next move. Due to this sudden change, he was able to tilt his body back, fast enough to narrowly avoid death. Yugito had put all of her weight into what she had assumed would be the finishing blow, and therefore, she lost her balance, nearly falling forward onto her face. Falling soon became the least of her worries, however, when she felt a kick land against the side of her head with pinpoint precision, causing her to be knocked back several feet, bouncing on the hard cobblestone ground like a stone skipping on water. How was he able to? She mumbled after getting back to her feet. Her eyes then widened as she noticed the change in her opponent. The very same crimson eyes stared back at her, but now, there were 3 tomo in each eye instead of 2. Naruto, on the other hand, looked on toward the enraged Jinchuriki with more clarity than he had ever been afforded before. It didn't take a genius to realize that his Sharingan had taken the final step in its evolution. The 3rd tomo, the point in which all of the Sharingan abilities reached peak form. Rather than just being able to see things more clearly, he was now able to fully predict the movements of whomever he was fighting. I have things that I still have to do, Naruto calmly explained, his eyes narrowing. People are counting on me, so I cannot die here. I apologize, but you will fail in your mission. Yugito grinned psychotically in response before lowering herself to the ground, standing on all 4s like a cat. As it had been for the entirety of their brief bout, her chakra increased in ferocity, so much so that it became visible. Blue chakra swirled around her, actually causing a breeze as it fluctuated in the air. I must admit, for a kid you aren't all that bad, Yugito complimented, though her tone was demeaning. But nobody who has ever pushed me this far has ever lived. So, I'm afraid. Halfway through her sentence, the ground cracked underneath her, and she launched herself toward him faster than most could blink. You're dead. She finished once she was in range. Surprisingly, she met no resistance, and her clawed hand pierced straight through his chest. As the blood spattered across her face, her grin only increased in size. She had done it. Just like all of the other missions she had been on before, she felt the warm blood of her enemy decorating her face and body. It was a glorious feeling. She made sure to look at her victim's face, taking in every detail as the blood began pouring from his mouth. The part of her that would have felt bad about killing a young child had left her long ago, so all she felt was utter glee. Nothing could possibly get in the way of the euphoria she was experiencing. Fire style. Dragon flame bombs. Upon hearing the voice, her eyes widened, and she quickly turned over her shoulder to see Naruto standing behind her, completely unharmed, preparing a jutsu. Turning back around, she saw the Naruto she had just pierced fade away into nothing. Shit. Genjutsu. She thought to herself hurriedly. A torrent of flames was then spewed from Naruto's mouth and approached the dazed Jinchuriki with blinding speed. She was unable to react in time, and was engulfed almost instantly. Naruto stood across from the blazing inferno, which along with Yugito's shrieks of agony, was fairly loud due to the roaring of the flames. As he waited for the results of his jutsu to be laid bare, he lifted his hands and looked down upon them. He felt like a completely different person now. His perception, it was unlike anything he had ever experienced before with the previous stages of his Sharingan. Now he knew how Lord Fugaku, and the other elite fighters of the Uchiha perceived combat with their eyes. It almost felt unfair for those who hadn't been born with the eyes of the Uchiha clan. It didn't take very long for the flames to die down, and when they did he saw his opponent face down on the ground, struggling to bring herself up to her feet. Her hair was singed, and her skin was littered with several severe burns that would need medical attention soon, otherwise they'd leave permanent scarring. You cannot continue and still hope to live, Naruto commented. I have no desire to take your life. Surrender now, and I will allow you to leave. In an unexpected move, his words only served to amuse Yugito, who began to laugh. Her back trembled as the eerie laugh escaped her lips, echoing throughout the surrounding area. Naruto remained unaffected, despite the fact that what he was witnessing was something that would make an ordinary person step back in worry. Why you'll let me go? She asked rhetorically. The prey doesn't allow the predator to leave. The predator leaves when it's eaten its full. That's how things work in this world of beasts. Naruto could only look on at what he viewed as a victim of the shinobi system. One did not come to such conclusions on their own, someone had to have conditioned her to see the world the way she did. It made Naruto feel pity, looking down at this person who could have very well lived a normal life had she not been forced to become a professional murderer. With no discernible physical reaction, Naruto spoke. You and I are not beasts. We are human, he said, pointing out the fatal flaw in her philosophy. We possess the mental capacity to push past our baser instincts. It is what allows us to nurture and care for others, even when it means putting ourselves at risk. That is what separates us from other animals, the ability to find greater purpose in life, one beyond merely surviving. Only silence followed. The kind of foreboding silence that could only occur when someone's worldview was questioned. Naruto could practically hear the gears turning in Yugito's head. It was very likely that this was the first time someone had ever decided to point out why her worldview was incorrect, either because they felt it was pointless, or because they couldn't care to do so. "You're wrong," she growled. "You're still young, but one day you'll come to see the world for what it really is. The more death you witness, the more blood you spill, the line between man and beast will become blurred, until you eventually reach the very same place that I have." Naruto simply waited for her to finish. His body was still recuperating, and every moment he could stall would increase his chances of survival should she decided to continue this fight. Yugito grinned at him as she brought herself back to all fours, a place of acceptance, she continued. "I've come to accept that this is the way that human beings truly are. And, if we truly are mere beasts of slaughter, then I may as well become the most dangerous of them all, the apex predator." Deciding that talking was now pointless, Naruto activated a pair of summoning seals on his wrists, and 2 shuriken appeared in his hands at the blink of an eye. Faster than most could track, Naruto unleashed a barrage of metallic death, flinging shuriken after shuriken. To her credit, Yugito remained defensive, either dodging or using her elongated nails to parry the assault. "You seem to be taking this seriously," she taunted before pausing her words to lean back and avoid a shuriken that would have pierced her skull. "Where's all your humanity now? You don't seem all that hesitant to kill me." Naruto ignored her. "Fire style. Phoenix flower jutsu," he said after weaving through a set of hand seals, faster than the eye could see. Upon doing so, a multitude of miniature fireballs were expelled from his mouth. However, he put a twist on the jutsu by simultaneously throwing shuriken as well, resulting in balls of flames with shuriken spinning dangerously at their center. "How fun," Yugito remarked, before she jumped into the air and avoided the danger. Naruto was then forced to take a momentary defensive approach when what appeared to be tiny balls of blue fire were expelled from Yugito's mouth like spit. At the center of all of the flaming projectiles, he could see hair in the shape of mice, which were engulfed entirely in blue flame. They all came speeding toward him with precision. He dodged, but was surprised when the attack he avoided changed course and came roaring toward him once more. They home in on their target, he thought to himself before turning and jumping in the other direction. He weaved through the various roads and alleyways of Uzushiogakure, all the while doing his best to maintain a distance between himself and the flaming mouse hairballs that seemed to be inching closer and closer by the second. To make matters worse, with every moment that went by, the hairballs appeared to multiply, increasing in number. "Earth style. Mobile core," Naruto announced, his hands forming the seal of the snake while he was still moving. Immediately after, a portion of the ground rose behind him as he continued to sprint on, resulting in many of the hairballs making contact and exploding. Several hairballs managed to avoid the earth core and continue on toward their target. Naruto took to the air, spinning and rotating with grace and dexterity, narrowly avoiding the flaming projectiles. Realizing that dodging wouldn't cut it, Naruto created a shadow clone, grabbed its arm, and tossed it into the remaining mouse hairballs. He then fell safely toward the ground, watching as his clone was engulfed in flames. Before he could reach the ground, however, he was forced to flip backward midair to avoid another blitzing attack from Yugito, who seemed hellbent on cutting him to shreds with her claws. Finally, landing securely on the ground, Naruto turned to face his opponent. They two stood off for several moments. "No one has ever given me a fight like this," Yugito commented with a grin. "No wonder Lord Raikage wants you dead." Naruto merely stared at her. "You talk quite a bit," he responded, causing her to grit her teeth in frustration. Her anger then quickly turned to glee. "Bye-bye," she taunted, to Naruto's brief confusion. Before he could react, a pair of hands erupted from the ground and gripped his ankles in a vice. Looking down, he quickly recognized that they were Yugito's. She created a clone, he observed as the original Yugito came speeding toward him. It seemed she was more capable of strategy than he had initially given her credit for. Much like she had earlier, she attempted to stab his chest with her claws. This time, however, her hands were grabbed by Naruto, mere millimeters before they would have reached his flesh. A battle of wills ensued, in which both parties exerted themselves to their max strength, with Yugito trying her damnedest to push her nails into his flesh, and Naruto doing his best to prevent her from doing so. You can't resist forever, Yugito taunted. Every second my chakra gets stronger and stronger. I can play this game all day. Naruto's grip on her wrists tightened. His calm expression only served to confuse Yugito, whose eyes narrowed in suspicion. Before she could even begin to ask what he was planning, she heard an odd sound above her. Looking up, her eyes widened in shock when she saw another Naruto falling from the air above her, holding a sphere of blue rotating chakra in his right hand. What is that? She thought to herself in horror. She tried to get away, but the Naruto gripping her wrists wouldn't allow her. Before she could acknowledge the irony of the trap she had planned ending up being her undoing, the Naruto falling toward her rammed the strange sphere of chakra into her back. The power behind the attack was massive, tearing and grinding into her flesh. Such was the force of the jutsu that Yugito was slammed into the stone ground below her, resulting in the area surrounding her being crushed. The Naruto that had been holding her in place disappeared in a cloud of smoke, revealing himself to have been a shadow clone. The real Naruto, who had just used the Rasengan in battle for the first time, looked down at his wounded opponent. She was bleeding profusely, and based on what he could see it was clear that many of her bones would require mending. Thankfully, she was now unconscious, so he could move on without having to worry about getting attacked. Pausing for a moment, he looked around him at the once bustling city of Uzushiogakure and sighed. I came here for knowledge and was only met with conflict, he thought to himself in disappointment. Out of his line of sight, behind him, Yugito was experiencing a change. Her skin began peeling off, revealing a dark red, nearly black, layer of chakra underneath. As the process continued, Naruto quickly became aware of the massive increase in chakra behind him and looked toward the unconscious Yugito with alarm. The chakra he was feeling now was in a completely different league than what he had felt earlier. So this is the power of the Nibi, he thought. It must be using her weakened state as an opportunity to escape. Soon, her entire body was encompassed by the blood-red chakra, until she looked nothing like a human at all. Her eyes were replaced by large glowing circles, and her mouth was now a maw with a similar glow, as if inside she was housing some incredible energy. There was no longer any human intelligence there. He was no longer face to face with Yugito, but rather, the Nibi influencing her unconscious body with its chakra. In the presence of such potent, untamed chakra, Naruto began to wonder if he would have any chance at all against such a foe. He was still just a child, a genin, after all. Then, he remembered what Jiraiya had revealed to him. Genjutsu, he remembered. I can suppress the chakra of the Nibi using my Sharingan. I just need to find the opportunity. Before he could finish his thought, Yugito disappeared in speed greater than he had ever witnessed before. Then, he saw crimson and quickly looked down to see that blood was spurting from a wound in his side. His eyes widened as he realized he had been attacked before he could even blink. Despite the pain of the injury and the blood dripping down his side, Naruto created distance by jumping back several feet. Yugito was now entirely like a beast, her vision darting around in all directions, looking for something, anything, to kill. She was no longer a person with the sole objective to kill him, she was now a monster that wanted to slaughter anything in sight. Soon, her eyes set on him and he racked his mind over what his next course of action should be. This time, he was more prepared, and his Sharingan was able to track her movements as she blurred toward him with astonishing speed. However, when he tried to move, he felt his body racked with intense pain and realized that the injury to his side was far more dangerous than he had initially thought it to be. I can't move, he realized as the unstable Jinchuriki came barreling towards him. Thankfully, right before Yugito could make contact with him, a massive mallet of red, glowing chakra slammed down on her, crushing the ground below. Naruto immediately recognized the jutsu and looked up toward the nearby rooftops to see Tonari giving him a casual wave. Hello, Naruto, he greeted with his signature smile. How are you? Naruto, breathing heavy due to blood loss, used all of his strength to jump into the air and land on the roof at Tonari's side. For once, he was pleased to see his teammate. I could be better, Naruto responded, before looking down toward the hammer of red chakra that was pinning Yugito to the ground. That won't be able to hold her for long. Tonari's expression became a bit more serious. I know, he acknowledged. Almost as if on cue, the chakra mallet was obliterated by the sheer magnitude and potency of the Nibi's chakra. Naruto and Tonari both got into lowered stances as they prepared for a possible incoming attack. With someone at his side, Naruto was feeling more confident about his chances, but was once again reminded of his injury when he felt the painful pulsating sensation on his side. How do we defeat such an enemy, Naruto? Tonari asked, looking toward his teammate. We are not yet strong enough to fight such foes, and you are injured. After a bout of heavy breathing, Naruto explained, I need to find an opportunity to put it under my genjutsu, he explained. Do you have any jutsu that can restrain it? Tonari seemed to think for a moment before responding. I do, but as you can see, it is able to overpower my tool creation jutsu fairly quickly. A brief second of eye contact is all I need, Naruto assured. Nodding in understanding, Tonari turned to face the confused Jinchuriki down below them. It was scanning the area, looking for anything that may serve as prey. It was clear that Naruto's injury would make a drawn-out fight impossible. The only way they could subdue this beast would be for Naruto to use his Sharingan, and if he were to lose consciousness due to blood loss before that happened, they'd both die. Deciding to be gutsy, Tonari jumped from his elevated and landed directly in front of Yugito, much to Naruto's surprise. Before he could issue out a warning, Tonari clapped his hands together, and barbed chains made of pure red chakra rose out of the ground, wrapping around Yugito and retraining her. She writhed and struggled, pushing the chains to their limits as it seemed they could snap at any moment. And now, Naruto! Tonari shouted, the strain of his jutsu causing sweat to trickle down his forehead as he kept his hands together. Not needing to be told twice, Naruto leapt from the rooftop, landing directly in front of the struggling Yugito, who looked at him with beastly curiosity as she momentarily stopped struggling. Naruto used this as his moment, and made eye contact with the rampaging Jinchuriki. His Sharingan eyes spun hypnotically, and Yugito froze almost instantly. Slowly but surely, the chakra around her began to fade away until she was back to her normal state, still wholly unconscious. Naruto and Tonari both were relieved, with the latter allowing the chakra chains to disappear, ending the immense strain on his chakra reserves. We did it, Naruto, said Tonari with a smile. Naruto didn't respond as he fell face first onto the ground, having finally lost too much blood to stay conscious. When his eyes fluttered open, he felt like he was in a daze. He stared up at a wooden ceiling and took note of the fact that he was resting on the ground. Naruto brought himself to a seated position, quickly noticing that his shirt had been removed and that bandages were wrapped around his sides. You lost a lot of blood, Naruto. You should rest and move as little as possible. Naruto recognized the voice, so he felt no surprise when he saw Tonari sitting cross-legged at his side. For once, Naruto found a bit of comfort in Tonari's presence, the kind he had only experienced before when spending time with Izumi. It was the feeling of friendship, of camaraderie. How long has it been? Naruto asked while cradling his side. Tonari looked forward, toward a roaring fireplace at the other end of the room. Only 24 hours, he answered. Naruto nodded tiredly before slumping back down to lay on his back. His body felt utterly sapped of energy, and he quickly realized that his chakra had likely been going haywire over the past hours, doing its best to heal him. I sent a clone to take the Kumogakure Jinchuriki far away, Tonari said, speaking again. I figured it wouldn't be a good idea to leave her in Uzushiogakure. Naruto's body was racked with a bit of pain as he remained still. Where are we now? He asked. I took you back across the water to the fishing village, Tonari explained with a smile. They had doctors here that were able to treat your wounds. They said they had never seen a healing factor like yours before, and that most people would have died from such an injury. But we both know that you are anything but normal. Naruto stayed silent, trying to relax. Months ago, he would have never trusted Tonari enough to allow himself to completely rest in his presence. However, seeing as he had just risked his life to help him defeat the Nibi Jinchuriki, Naruto felt that the least he could do was give him his trust. You followed me to Uzushiogakure? Naruto asked, realizing that was the only way he could have arrived to help him in time. Tonari appeared sheepish and scratched the back of his head. Well, yes. I know that you told me not to follow you anymore, but I figured traveling alone would be really dangerous after everything that is happening between the village and Kumogakure. So, I apologize for. Before he could finish, he was interrupted. Tonari. Yes. Thank you. Silence reigned as Naruto finally allowed himself to fall back to sleep. Tonari, on the other hand, looked down at his teammate with a smile. It was different from his usual grin, more genuinely happy. Naruto had essentially just acknowledged him, giving him his thanks and trusting him enough to sleep in his presence. You're welcome, Naruto. The Sharingan, the eyes that reflected the heart. That's what Naruto always called them. Looking at her newly acquired ocular jutsu in the mirror, Izumi couldn't help but think that hers reflected sorrow. Red eyes which now reflected the blood of her fallen comrade, that was all she saw. Is this the weight of the agony that you endure, Naruto? She thought to herself, before shaking her head. No, it was disrespectful of her to compare her pain to that of someone who has lost so much. Nevertheless, sharing a bit in Naruto's pain made her feel as though she understood him a bit better. She had seen many people die throughout her life, mostly due to her father bringing her to look at the horrors of the Third Shinobi World War firsthand. However, now was the first time she had been forced to watch the life drain from the eyes of someone she knew personally. Tenma, her teammate, had died. To be more specific, his life had been stolen, taken by a monster who hid behind a mask. Izumi vividly remembered the helplessness she felt when facing against the masked man, with all of her attacks going through him as if he were a mere phantom. She would have surely perished that day if not for Tenma intervening at the cost of his own life. Her thoughts were interrupted, and she was forced to compose herself after she felt a familiar presence approaching her from behind. Looking over her shoulder, she saw the little bundle of energy that was her sister, Mito. The girl's presence had been incredibly helpful over the past few days, but she'd be lying if she said the first time she saw her she didn't flinch. The redness of her hair initially caused Izumi's mind to be assaulted with images of blood. Big sis, Mama says that Big Bro will be coming home soon, the little girl remarked with a smile. She said that he promised before he left that he'd be back by today no matter what. Izumi nodded, quite skillfully hiding her inner turmoil. Yes, I heard, she confirmed. And Naruto always keeps his word, so expect him to return any minute now. Mito squirmed with delight. Gah, I'm so excited. She beamed. I can't wait to show him the new drawings that I made for him. The remark made Izumi raise her brow in mock surprise. Drawings? She asked, knowing that her sister came in with the sole purpose of showing off her artwork. The inquiry produced an expected result, with Mito bobbing her head up and down with enough force and energy to snap an ordinary person's neck. She then ran out of the room, and presumably to her own, before returning with several pieces of paper. Sheer glee was evident on her face when she extended the papers toward him, big sister, likely with the intention of having them critiqued. Pretending to look upon the works of art with a critical gaze, Izumi found herself incredibly amused as she flipped through each one. As expected, they were all pretty similar in style, with bright colors and crudely drawn figures and objects. Most involved a spiky-haired blonde boy, who was very obviously Naruto, doing all sorts of activities with a much shorter red-headed girl. Very nice. I particularly like the detail in the drawings. They're so lifelike. Mito grinned before crossing her arms. Right. They're pretty awesome, she responded casually, as if she was already aware of how amazing her drawings were. But I couldn't help but notice that Sasuke isn't in any of these, Izumi commented, playfully. Where was he when you and Naruto were having all of this fun? As expected, Mito scoffed haughtily. He's too much of a baby to play with us, she explained. He'd probably just pee his pants or something if he came along, and we'd have to take him all the way back home to change his diaper. The door to Izumi's room suddenly burst open, with an enraged-looking Sasuke stomping in. It was clear that he had been eavesdropping on their entire conversation, which was the reason Izumi had brought his name up in the first place. His presence was quite easy to detect, even when he was trying to be stealthy. What was that you just said, crybaby? He growled, getting into Mito's face. Aghast at being branded with arguably the most heinous of childish insults, Mito snapped back at Sasuke, sparking an argument that Izumi couldn't bring herself to listen to. While their innocence was without a doubt refreshing, their spats were about as irritating as screeching metal. Even someone with her patience needed a break every once in a while. All it took was a bit of stealth, and she was out of the house without them even knowing that she had left. Minutes later, sitting atop the Hokage stone faces was about as far away from prying eyes that one could get without actually leaving the village. When choosing which Hokage head she wished to sit on, she chose the fourth, which was a natural choice due to her relationship with Naruto. Gazing out upon the village, she thought about everything that she had come to believe over the course of her admittedly brief life. Her goal had always been to play at least some role in maintaining the peace that so many of her fellow shinobi had died creating, but now she was beginning to wonder if she was even capable of affecting anything at all. That masked man, he was so powerful. If he desired to kill Sasuke or Mito or harm the village, she'd be unable to stop him. It would be foolish to assume that there weren't others out there like him, perhaps even those that could boast a superior level of strength. The Raikage immediately came to mind. That man had been beating the drums of war for quite some time now, and after audacious move, it was becoming progressively more apparent that the conflict he desired was inevitable. People like him and the masked man, they were among the few types of individuals that she held disdain for. In her eyes, those who had strength were not meant to create violence and conflict, but rather, they were gifted with the talent to use their gifts to fight for the greater good. If she was honest, she felt that their power was being wasted on them. Sitting on the first Hokage's stone head would be much more comfortable. My father had very spiky hair, so the top of his stone head is quite jagged, a familiar voice suddenly said from behind her. Izumi couldn't help but smile upon hearing the voice. Even without seeing Naruto's face, just listening to him speak, feeling his chakra and knowing that he was there was enough to create a soothing sensation that enveloped her entire being. She turned to face him. I'm glad that you returned safely, Naruto, she greeted, before shifting over a bit so he could sit next to her. He accepted the unspoken invitation and slowly lowered himself down next to her. As he did, she subconsciously activated her new Sharingan when she noticed something off about him. He was favoring his side a bit, as if he had been injured in some way or another. His face showed little in the form of pain, but this was Naruto that she was thinking about. He could handle anything in stride. You're injured, she remarked as casually as she could. Naruto didn't even so much as look in her direction as he spoke, and you have a set of new eyes. Leave it to Naruto to be the first to notice the change in her eyes. To be fair, she had been careful to hide it from anyone that she knew up to this point. It was just another sign that Naruto truly was the person that she was most comfortable around. With him, she didn't feel the need to hide anything that she hid in front of others. How did it happen? Upon hearing the question, her eyes reverted to their normal onyx color, and she appeared to have a faraway gaze, as if recalling a memory that was buried within the confines of her mind. Tenma was killed on my last mission. There was no immediate response from Naruto, which was unsurprising since he was always the type to think over his words carefully before speaking. Or maybe he just did it for dramatic effect. The ludicrousness of the thought nearly made her chuckle. After all, Naruto was anything but theatric. Then, he finally spoke. What do you want to do? He asked. It didn't take more than a second for her to respond. I want to become stronger, so that my dreams will cease to be mere dreams. She turned to face him, only to discover that he was already staring at her, intently. His Sharingan was activated, each with 3 tomo. He had achieved it, the full evolution of the dojutsu. He was probably far more powerful than he had been last time they saw each other. He placed his hand on her back in a comforting gesture. We have plenty of time to make that happen, he responded. Right now we're comfortably residing within the calm before the storm. I will give it my all, she assured with a smile. I promise. 3 years later. I won't say anything. You're wasting your time, so just please let me go. Naruto, now taller and more matured, was leaning casually against a tree as he watched the interrogation taking place before him. The victim, a Kumogakure shinobi, whose headband was currently being used as a blindfold to inhibit his sight, was bound tightly to a tree with ninja wire. His shirt had been removed, and there were several cuts littering his arms and upper body. Kneeled before him was Tonari, who was wielding a bloodied kunai. Come now, you understand your predicament, Tonari said matter-of-factly. We already know where your people are camped out. We just need some more details, so please relinquish the intel willingly. I grow weary of cutting you. Seated not too far behind Tonari was another Konoha shinobi with unruly black hair and equally black eyes, who was looking as if he was on the precipice of falling asleep out of sheer boredom. He was sitting crisscross on the grass, with his chin was resting in his palm, his expression deadpan as he watched Tonari's continuous failed attempts at interrogation. Come on, man, he complained. It's clearly not working. How about you just let me use my genjutsu to loosen his tongue? Tonari stood up and turned to face his complaining teammate. Very well, he relented, while cleaning the blood from his kunai with a cloth. However, Shisui, make sure to incapacitate him after you've finished. Shisui scoffed. My original plan was to let him run off to warn his people after I finished. But now that you mention it, knocking him out seems like a pretty good idea, he remarked sarcastically before approaching the captured shinobi, his Sharingan active and ready for use. Naruto sighed and pushed himself off the tree. Wrap this up and use the genjutsu already, or I will, he requested, with his own Sharingan gleaming in the dark. With a roll of the eyes, Shisui kneeled down before the prisoner and removed the headband that was covering the man's eyes. The man blinked, his vision without a doubt acclimating to having just reclaimed sight. Upon looking at his captors, his eyes widened in fear as he looked at Shisui. Why you're Shisui Uchiha, he muttered to himself, clearly fearful of Shisui's reputation. Being a bit older than Naruto, by a handful of years, Shisui was an amazing prodigy in his own right, with him being hailed as one of the most talented fighters in the history of the Uchiha clan. His use of genjutsu was unmatched, as was his prowess with the Shunshin Jutsu, granting him various nicknames such as Shisui the Teleporter and Shisui of the Mirage. Yeah, I am. Now hold still, Shisui responded before finally making eye contact. Immediately, the prisoner's eyes glazed over and his body seized. He then proceeded to spill his guts against his will, his voice monotone due to the genjutsu. He muttered about one camp, with 60 men, who had covertly passed over the border not even 24 hours ago. Well, that confirms the intel that Izumi so graciously provided, Shisui mumbled before knocking the prisoner out and binding his hands and feet. But at least now we know how many there are. Roughly 60 enemy shinobi, and the Raikage would have likely only sent his most skilled men on such an important mission. They were hidden well, and had managed to pass over the border of the land of hot water without being detected. It was only due to Danzo's paranoia that they were discovered, as he had his own Anbu constantly monitoring the land of fire and all the minor nations surrounding it. Our original plan will still work just fine, Naruto said. Tonari will advance and rendezvous with Izumi to eliminate the target while Shisui and I occupy the enemy's attention. Tonari nodded, before forming a single-hand seal, chameleon jutsu. Immediately after, his body appeared to turn invisible. A versatile technique indeed, the chameleon jutsu allowed a person to manipulate the way light was reflected off of their body, using chakra inflection. Perceiving the user's position was possible only for ninja who were astute enough to observe minute variations within their surrounding environment, such as distortions of air currents in the immediate vicinity or distinguishing sounds. Of course, however, it was also useless against perceptive dojutsu abilities, such as the Sharingan and Byakugan. Able to see him clearly as due to their Sharingan eyes allowing them to see his chakra, Naruto and Shisui watched Tonari leap into the direction of the camps without a word. He was by far the most adept at stealth and infiltration between the three of them, due to his various jutsu and the X-ray, 360-degree vision provided by his Byakugan, as well as his sublime chakra control, allowing him to only be sensed by the most elite sensory shinobi. The two waited for a few minutes before advancing as well. They'd attack the camp directly, distracting the occupants so that Izumi and Tonari could actually complete the real mission, which was to eliminate a defector that had fled the village with critical intel, hoping to sell it to the Raikage for a profit. How long has it been since we last saw Izumi? A month. Shisui asked while scratching his cheek. Naruto kept his vision ahead as he and his comrade weaved through the trees. A month and 7 days, actually, he corrected. She's been tracking the defector for quite some time. Shisui grinned and made kissing noises in an attempt to get under Naruto's skin. Counting the days since your little girlfriend left on her mission. Izumi and I are merely friends, Naruto retorted calmly. All he earned in response was a scoff. Yeah, sure. Keeping telling yourself that. Naruto could only sigh. It was pointless to argue with Shisui, so he just kept quiet as they continued on. Izumi quietly chewed on a food pill as she observed the enemy camp from a safe distance, perched in a tree. Based on the most recent message she had received from Naruto, Tonari would meet her at her current position to assist with the elimination of the defector. If things went smoothly, this mission wouldn't be all that difficult. Hello, Tonari, she suddenly said out of the blue, able to see the stealthy Byakugan user with the assistance of her Sharingan. When she had discovered that Tonari and Naruto had actually become friends after the latter's trip to Uzushiogakur, she was admittedly surprised. They two boys had most definitely started off on the wrong foot when they first met, but apparently, if not for Tonari, Naruto would have died in the ruins of his ancestral home. It made sense that they would form a bond after something like that. Izumi Uchiha, it has been a while, Tonari responded on the branch next to her, though he refrained from deactivating his jutsu, leaving him to still be invisible to the eye. Are you ready to advance? She nodded in response before bursting into a flock of crows. The crows then flew toward the camp, making sure to stay quiet and fly in the shadows of the night. Tonari's approach was much more straightforward, with him merely running toward the camp with no fear of being spotted. Once the crows reached the perimeter, they formed together, and Izumi appeared once more. She waited until she felt Tonari at her side before she led the way into the camp. Most of the Kumo shinobi were already sleeping in their tents. However, the target was currently being held within the main tent at the center of the camp, and it was surrounded by alert enemies. Getting to the target under their current circumstances would be impossible. Izumi made a set of hand signals to Tonari, which roughly translated to, "We wait for comrades." He seemed to understand what she meant because he stopped moving and waited at her side until Naruto and Shisui appeared to create the diversion. The signal that the proverbial cavalry had arrived was when a massive fireball roared through the camp, carrying away and incinerating many tents in its wake. The display achieved the desired result, with the Kumogakur shinobi shifting all of their attention to whoever was responsible, even at the cost of neglecting their duty to guard the valued defector. After waiting another moment, Izumi raised her hand in a signal to continue, and the two slowly made it to the camp, keeping low and staying in the shadows as much as possible. In the distance, they heard enemy shinobi shouting in panic, as well as sounds of combat and death. At one point, a Kumogakur shinobi nearly spotted them but was instantly killed by Shisui, who appeared and disappeared just as quickly with a shunshin. His mastery of the jutsu was truly astounding, and even during such a critical mission Izumi could not help but find herself in a bit of awe, but only for a brief moment. Naruto and Shisui made things incredibly easy. Due to the clear danger that they both presented, even the guards who had been surrounding the tent left their posts to try and help fend them off. Just like that, they were crouched in front of the tent, mere feet away from reaching the target that Izumi had been perusing for weeks. After it had become known that a traitor had stolen secret intel and escaped over the village walls under cover of the night, many had been surprised when the Hokage had chosen Izumi to pursue him. Most were under the assumption that he would have chosen Kakashi Hatake, and questioned whether a child could get the mission done. Now was the time to prove them wrong. He is inside. I see him, Tonari whispered. Not even a second after he let the words flow from his mouth, Izumi was in the tent with a blade piercing through the defector's chest. She made sure to get it done quickly and cleanly, and took no pleasure in the act itself. Murder had always been something that she wasn't quite fond of, but she was also mature enough to admit that it was something required of her. It is fitting that you did the deed, Tonari said from behind her as he entered the tent through the front flaps. You alert the others while I dispose of the body. Not needed to be told twice, Izumi exited the tent before weaving through a familiar string of hand seals and unleashing a massive ball of flames into the night sky. She waited for Tonari to finish his work before leaping back into the darkness once more in the direction of the rendezvous point. In total, the mission had taken only 5 minutes. I'm 99% sure that I took out more of them than you did, Naruto, Shisui bragged as he and the younger blonde finally made it to the rendezvous point. They were both greeted with a roaring fire, courtesy of Izumi and Tonari, who had both taken the initiative and prepared a camp for the night while they waited for their comrades to return. Predictably, Naruto and Shisui had taken a bit longer to finish their portion of the mission, since they needed to escape the battle at the camp and make sure that they weren't being followed. Naruto crossed his arms and closed his eyes. I wasn't counting how many I defeated. Shisui's ever-present grin only widened even further, you're only saying that because you know I beat more than you did. Compared to most other members of the Uchiha clan, Shisui was undoubtedly an oddball. While most Uchiha were quiet, he was rather expressive, and he also had a great sense of humor, though Naruto would likely comment that great was a subjective term, considering how much Shisui tried to get under his skin, which made him very pleasant to be around. So basically, he was the complete opposite of Fugaku. You guys sure took a long time, Tonari greeted with a smile. By my estimation, it took you 30 minutes to shake the enemy off of your trail. Naruto sat down next to Izumi, and Shisui plopped down at the other end of the fire. The flames of the fire flickered almost violently due to the force of the wind, which created many intriguing shadows in the forest. Without a doubt, one could get lost in observing their beauty for hours. Those guys were relentless, Shisui complained in response. Probably because they were so embarrassed at being outclassed. Naruto glared in his comrade's direction, or perhaps it is because you insisted on taunting them as they pursued us. Shisui raised his arms in a defensive fashion. What's the point of doing this job if you can't find a way to enjoy it every once in a while? Funny enough, nobody voiced any sort of disagreement, and they each sat silently, staring at the fire. At that moment, Izumi subtly glanced in Naruto's direction, making sure not to be seen by anyone else. He had grown quite a bit over the past 3 years, but he still stood at an average size for an 11-year-old. His hair remained mostly the same, but his face had become more angular, leading to him appearing quite handsome. Izumi herself had grown quite a bit as well, looking more and more like her mother every day. Her hair had increased in length and was now tied into a ponytail that reached the center of her back. At this point, the only thing that prevented her from looking like a mini clone of her mother was the long, pronounced tear troughs under her eyes. Hours passed, and it was eventually just Naruto and Izumi who remained awake, with Shisui being the first to succumb to his exhaustion and Tonari falling not too far behind. Izumi would be lying if she said that she wasn't happy that she and Naruto had been granted this brief time alone with each other. After a month apart, she felt that it was very much needed. Can I ask you something, Naruto? Izumi spoke up in a subdued tone, being sure not to wake the others up. Naruto, from his relaxed position in front of the fire, looked toward her inquisitively and nodded. For whatever reason, Izumi found herself short for words as she contemplated the best way to ask her closest friend something that she had been meaning to ask him for quite some time. What do you think it means to be a shinobi? She asked, recalling the question she had asked herself long ago as a child. The randomness of the question caught Naruto a bit off guard, but nevertheless, he looked back toward the fire in contemplation. As he did, Izumi patiently waited, wondering what his answer would be. She often wondered if people thought about these kinds of things as well. What did it mean to be alive? What was a shinobi? What was a village? These were all things she had been wondering since childhood. A shinobi is someone who endures, and has the will to never give up no matter what adversity they are faced with, Naruto responded. Izumi smiled softly, finding his interpretation to be both beautiful and accurate. It honestly sounded like something that someone could find in a piece of poetry, which was ironic since it came from the mouth of someone that was notorious for rarely speaking. That sounds like you, Naruto, she complimented with a smile. You embody all of those characteristics. Izumi heard a soft chuckle next to her and saw Naruto looking as amused as she had ever seen him before, which was saying a lot. She was enraptured by the sound of his laugh and the radiance of his smile. It was a far cry from the look he usually gave off, with his emotions concealed and eyes hiding deep-seated pain. Right now, at this moment, he wasn't hiding anything at all. Actually, I was thinking of you when I gave my answer, he confessed, causing Izumi's eyes to widen in surprise. Nobody represents the ideal shinobi better than you. For perhaps the first time in her life, Izumi found herself blushing. As a prodigious talent, she had spent all of her life being praised by others, which essentially made her immune to being flustered by compliments. However, hearing something so genuinely touching from the person that she cared for the most in this world, well, it made her feel a way that she had never felt before. Thankfully, the shadows created by the fire hid enough to where Naruto didn't notice, or maybe he did catch a glimpse of her vulnerable moment and refused to comment. In all honesty, she would prefer to think that it was the former, but the later was equally, if not more likely. Suddenly, and without thinking, Izumi placed her right hand on top of Naruto's left. If someone could have asked her what overtook her at that moment, she honestly wouldn't have had an answer for them. It just felt right, if that made any sense. Naruto didn't outright react to the gesture as he continued to stare at the fire. No words were said, which was good since they would have only interrupted the moment. At first, his lack of reaction made Izumi feel incredibly nervous. What was he thinking? Was he confused by the gesture? As if he could hear her thoughts, Naruto turned toward her and smiled, making no move to remove her hand from his own. At that moment, she knew that she had made the right choice. The Ansatsu Senjutsu Tokushu Butai, more commonly referred to as Anbu, was a special assassination and tactical squad of capable, covert operatives dispatched by the Hokage himself. They were the elite of the elite, dealing in only high-risk missions consisting of A-rank or even S-rank difficulty level tasks. Recruitment into the Anbu was not at all based on rank or experience, but rather, entirely on the merit and skill of the prospect. However, a prospect's abilities weren't the only factors taken into consideration. Due to the darkness involved in an Anbu's career, one's personality also determined their eligibility. They worked in the darkness to protect those that resided in the light, such was their duty. The Hokage, along with his trusted advisors, Danzo, Kaharu, and Hamura, were currently locked in a discussion pertaining to the newest list of possible Anbu recruits. The debate stemmed from the two final remaining names, each which had been proposed by Danzo himself, which was a rare occurrence indeed. To recommend that two children so young be inducted into the Anbu, such a proposal would be unprecedented, Kaharu voiced with skepticism. Danzo remained stoic as always, even when having his judgment questioned. They are not ordinary children, he countered. I personally have overseen the development of the boy. Having him serve anywhere other than the Anbu would be a waste of his talents. He and the girl both would benefit the village most there. Kaharu's face grew pensive as she contemplated her old comrade's words while Homura remained quiet, preferring to gauge the reactions of the others before making his own decision. The Hokage, however, seemed almost relaxed, as if he was unconcerned with what was going on. Naruto Uzumaki is the honorable son of our fourth Hokage, Homura finally spoke up after realizing nobody else intended to speak. Would being placed in such a dangerous position at so young an age truly be what his father would have wanted for him? If Danzo were less concerned with concealing his thoughts and emotions, he would have scoffed. In this room, where everyday decisions were made that would affect the future of the village for years, there was no room for such foolish sentimentality. In his eyes, Naruto wasn't the son of their village's greatest hero, he was, like all shinobi, an asset, and assets were used, not protected. And what of the girl? Kaharu chimed in. With tensions between the village and the Uchiha clan being as high as they are, would it truly be wise to place her in a position where she will be granted access to classified information? Her words were difficult to argue against. With every year that went by, the Uchiha clan's ties to the village became weaker and weaker. Their clansmen became more and more reclusive, staying within the confines of the Uchiha district, and the police force, headed by Fugaku, was losing the trust of the village's populace as a whole. Izumi Uchiha can be trusted, Hiruzen interjected, speaking for the first time in quite a while. That child is capable of seeing the bigger picture already. Her mind operates far beyond its years. Danzo nodded in agreement, and the boy is arguably even sharper, he said, once more attesting to his student's prowess. I can assure you that in the history of our village, no shinobi has been born with more potential. He must be given the opportunity to gain more experience. Kaharu and Homura both found their eyes widening immediately after hearing his words. Danzo was not one for exaggeration or hyperbole. If he said something, he meant it. To listen to him so utterly confident in the potential of this young boy was astounding. In all honesty, for them, it was enough to erase any of their doubts. If Danzo vouched for him, then he was ready. Ultimately, the decision is yours, Hiruzen, Homura continued, deciding that they put an end to the debate once and for all. Hiruzen remained silent as he appeared to smoke his pipe contemplatively. In truth, his decision had been made before the whole argument had even begun. Naruto and Izumi would be inducted into the Anbu. They possessed the necessary prowess, and their skills would be best put to use serving their village within the shadows. I agree with Danzo's proposal, he concluded. Naruto Uzumaki and Izumi Uchiha will be recruited into the Anbu Black Ops. While the decision didn't leave anyone jumping for joy, Danzo was pleased with how things turned out. Without another word, he slowly rose to his feet before making the slow journey out of the office. As he exited, the rhythmic tapping of his cane could be heard moving down the hall. Danzo would never push forth a proposal unless he has his own agenda, Hiruzen, Kaharu warned as she too prepared to leave. You of all people should know that by now. With that, the last of the three advisors left the room, leaving Hiruzen alone to continue smoking his pipe in peace. Silence reigned for quite a while as the Hokage appeared to use this opportunity to get some well-earned relaxation. His job had been more stressful than ever as of late, which could mostly be attributed the growing threats to the village, both inside and out. What do you think, Kakashi? He suddenly asked out of the blue. As soon as he spoke, a figure appeared before him in a kneeling position. He wore the standard Anbu attire, which included a porcelain mask that concealed his identity, though his spiky silver hair was still entirely visible. Now in the presence of his leader, he removed the mask, revealing his facial features, which, oddly enough, were still mostly hidden from view. His right eye was black, and for the most part, he would be described as having a relaxed, heavy-lidded expression. There was a vertical scar over his left eye, alluding to a past injury of some kind, and he kept it closed for the most part. This, combined with a mask he used to cover the lower half of his face, prevented the majority of his appearance from being seen. They are both so young, Lord Hokage, Kakashi remarked, voicing his skepticism while also remaining as respectful as possible. Hiruzen chuckled, as were you when you became a Genin, and a Chunin, and a Jonin, he joked. If I'm not mistaken, you were the youngest in the history of our village for all three of those instances. You of all people should understand that age should not factor into one's rank, only ability. I suppose so, Kakashi relented, though it was clear that he was still iffy on the idea. Still, at the end of the day, it was not up to him. Izumi Uchiha will be filling the vacant spot on your squad, Hiruzen continued. Kakashi's brows raised slightly, and where will Naruto be assigned? Hiruzen smiled as he thought of his plans for Naruto. Yes, it was the perfect fit for him. Well, you see, Naruto and Izumi both remained silent as they descended the steps to the subterranean base which served as the headquarters of the Konoha Anbu Black Ops. There was no guided tour of any kind, and they were merely informed of where they would need to go. First, they would retrieve their equipment from the armory before going to their individual assignments. I sense a presence ahead. We must be reaching the bottom soon, Izumi observed. Naruto sensed it too, and they were quickly proven correct when the steps finally came to an end, and they found the armory, which was identifiable by a fluorescent sign. There was a lone Anbu manning the weapon storage lockers, and he was protected behind a set of steel bars, with only a single slot for him to pass on whatever was being requested. It could be inferred that operatives could fill out requests for any equipment they needed should theirs need replacing, and it would be provided to them. Naruto and Izumi approached the armory, and without so much as a word of greeting, the man slid 2 trays through the opening. The first was given to Izumi, and the second was passed along to Naruto. Each tray contained a porcelain mask with a unique design painted on it, and the standard set of Konoha Anbu armor, as well as a tanto. Here's your equipment, the Anbu drawled, his voice as monotone as one would expect. Izumi nodded in appreciation. Thank you very much, she said before they both turned around and made their way toward the lockers' rooms. They walked down a dimly lit hallway and past several doorways. Each room contained the lockers for a respective squad and was where each member would change in and out of their uniforms before and after missions. It was also the only location in which operatives were allowed to use their real names when communicating with one another. Eventually, they reached a door with the kanji for RO labeled above. Izumi suddenly came to an abrupt stop, which told Naruto that she had finally reached her assignment. This is my squad's locker room, she explained before giving Naruto a small smile. Wish me luck. Naruto nodded in acknowledgement before continuing on without a word. Behind him, he heard the door open, and Izumi offer a brief greeting before it closed behind her, trapping all sound inside. He smiled slightly to himself as he continued to lug his equipment to his intended destination. Izumi was always so polite when meeting new people. Even without knowing of her talent, most instantly admired her due to how well she treated others. Much like the stairs leading to the hidden base, the hallway seemed to go on forever, and Naruto's eyes narrowed before shifting into his Sharingan. After doing so, he quickly realized that something was amiss, and made the slightest fluctuation in his chakra to break free of the subtle genjutsu that had been placed on him. When he did, he noticed a presence behind him. There was a lone Anbu that seemed to have been following him. He was wearing a dark, hooded cloak over his armor, so only his mask and sandals were visible. He stood ominously in the shadows, not uttering a single word, seemingly preferring to stare at Naruto eerily. Welcome to the Anbu, Naruto Uzumaki. I hope that you are ready to experience pain, the likes of which you could have never envisioned in your worst nightmares, the man said in a grave tone, though in reality, it came off more as someone pathetically attempting to change their voice to make it sound more intimidating. Naruto sighed, is that you, Shisui? The Anbu froze in place, and no. Who is this? Shisui, you speak of. I can sense your chakra, you know. Naruto continued. Damn it. Some time later. So, Lord Hokage placed me on a team with you. Naruto remarked as he and Shisui stood next to each other at the edge of the Naka River. I was unaware that you were in the Anbu. After putting on his new gear, much of Naruto's appearance was left to the imagination. Like all other Anbu, his attire consisted of a black, sleeveless, skin-tight turtleneck shirt, a gray flak jacket, metal arm guards with gloves, ninja sandals with barely visible spikes for traveling into mountainous regions, 3 pouches on his back waist and a signature red spiral tattoo on his left shoulder. In addition, he also wore his new tanto strapped on his back. His face was also hidden by his new porcelain mask, with red painted on designs which depicted what appeared to be a fox. There was even a slight protrusion for the snout, a set of pointed ears, as well as 2 circular eye holes, through which his Sharingan could be seen. Yeah, normally I work highly classified missions, so I rarely talk about it, Shisui responded casually, dressed identically to Naruto, though he opted to wear the Uchiha-style short-sleeved, high-collared shirt under his gray flak jacket rather than the standard sleeveless turtleneck. His mask depicted a raven, including a fairly long protrusion for the beak. Naruto nodded. Which codenames will we use to refer to one another when we are on duty? Shisui turned to face him, and Naruto was confident that behind his mask he was grinning. You will call me Crow, and I will call you Fox. Is that acceptable for you? Fox. Naruto was beginning to wonder if the Hokage was playing some kind of joke on him. Were he a lesser man he would have been greatly offended, having to essentially bear a likeness to the beast that wreaked havoc on his village, killed his parents, and now painted an enormous target over his sister's head. I was young when my father's health began to decline, Shisui spoke up out of the blue, staring down at his reflection in the river. And one day, I snuck out into the woods in frustration and was practically assaulted by a murder of crows, resulting in me losing my footing and falling into a ravine. I very nearly died, and for a while, I was terrified of those crows, and was always afraid of training in the woods. Naruto glanced toward his friend. He already had a pretty good idea about what he was getting at, but he was going to let him finish before chiming in. It was the polite thing to do, after all. A few months later, I became sick of being afraid, and returned to the place where I had been attacked, Shisui continued before looking away from the water and directly into Naruto's eyes. The crows surrounded me once more, however this time, I refused to move or be afraid. I embraced what had once caused me trauma in my past, and now, I bear the likeness of a crow on my mask, and have a summoning contract with the very crows that attacked me. Naruto responded after a moment of thought, I am not afraid of the Kyuubi, nor do I hate it. It is a force of destructive nature that was momentarily released from its prison. The result was to be expected. Shisui shook his head, it is not the Kyuubi that haunts you, but rather, the event that it represents, he explained. That night you lost so much, and while you are adept at hiding your pain from others, the weight that you carry on your shoulders is as clear as day to me. While he presented himself as rather laid back and carefree, Shisui was far from a fool. In fact, Naruto was entirely confident in the fact that his friend was every bit as intelligent as he was. Shisui's genius extended far beyond a talent for the shinobi arts, granting him the ability to perceive things most people couldn't notice, as well as tackle issues that most would sweep away under the rug. Shisui then closed the distance between them and placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder. You're good at fooling yourself. That's why you can't grasp your true feelings. Never forget what you lost, but don't allow it to continue making you miserable, he advised. That's why I made the request to Lord Hokage that your mask and codename be what they are. Naruto nodded resolutely. I understand. I will have a lot to think about now. Thank you. Upon realizing that his little speech had actually worked, Shisui practically glowed, no doubt with a toothy grin concealed behind his mask. If there was one thing that Shisui loved above all else, it was helping people that were in need. In fact, the very first time they met one another was when Shisui decided to help him in his training. They'd been training partners ever since. Have you spoken with Tonari since your promotion? Shisui asked, changing the subject. Naruto nodded. He always made sure to keep in close contact with his teammate and friend. Tonari, along with Shisui, was without a doubt Naruto's closest friend, outside of Izumi, of course. Though, admittedly, his relationship with her was a bit more difficult to define. He is happy for me, Naruto explained. Apparently, he received a similar offer to become one of Danzo-sensei's personal Anbu. Apparently, he still hasn't decided on whether or not he'll accept. Team 1, otherwise known as Team Danzo, had a strange tenure, to say the least. They were arguably the least active of all the genin teams from their graduating class, as they focused more on training and battle simulations than actual missions. Hana got a bit left behind though when their opportunity to take the Chunin exams came around. Naruto and Tonari felt that they were ready, but Hana felt that she wasn't as prepared as her teammates, so she opted to sit out. In the end, it all worked out since Izumi was without a team for the exam, so she took Hana's place and the three passed the exam with flying colors. After that, Team 1 stayed together for a while, until Hana started working as a veterinary medical nin, essentially retiring from the team. Naruto still kept in touch with her and was pleased to hear that she was much happier in her new job, preferring helping animals over combat. However, needless to say, Danzo-sensei was not pleased. Shisui scoffed behind his mask. If I were him, I'd stay away from that creepy old fart and his private army, he chimed in, before quickly tensing up. I mean, no offense, you know, since he was your sensei and all. Naruto shook his head. It's okay. I don't have the highest opinion of him either, he clarified. While we fight for the same goal, I find myself questioning his methods and motivations. With a tilt of the head, Shisui responded, care to go into detail? He asked. I believe that he truly wants what is best for the village, Naruto elaborated after pausing in thought. However, he is unable to trust others, and therefore, wrongfully believes that he is the only person that can protect Konoha and lead it to prosperity. I think that such a mindset is incredibly dangerous, especially when the person has the resources that Danzo-sensei possesses. Shisui nodded in agreement. People like that are willing to do anything to reach their goals, he said. When you think that you're advancing toward the greater good, anything you do feels justified, especially when you're a cynical narcissist like him. A new voice behind them chuckled. Cynical narcissist. That's a good one. Before the intruder had even finished their sentence, Naruto and Shisui were standing meters away, atop the river's surface, tantos drawn and ready to fight. However, their efforts were quickly proven to be pointless. Why? Because the Hokage himself was standing before them, conical hat and all. Lord Hokage. They both greeted respectfully before bowing. Secretly, however, they were racking their brains. They couldn't feel his chakra or presence at all. The Hokage smiled. Pardon my intrusion, but I couldn't help but find myself captivated by your conversation. Especially at the mention of your backstory about the crows, Shisui. I nearly shed a tear. Shisui's shoulders slumped in embarrassment while Naruto's tensed. Something didn't feel right, leaving him completely on edge. Where are you really, Lord Hokage? Naruto asked. The old man actually seemed more pleased than put off at being caught, in my office, enjoying my pipe and a good book. Is it one of the Ika novels? Shisui asked, perking up instantly. Now it was the Hokage's turn to appear embarrassed, in fear of being outed to his village as a pervert. However, his secret seemed to be safe with Shisui, who pulled a copy of Ika Paradise, revealing himself to also be a fan. After getting over the fact that two of the people he respected the most were fans of his godfather's erotic novels, Naruto focused his Sharingan on the Hokage, and noticed something incredible. He was intangible and made entirely of chakra. It was as if the Hokage was standing before them, and yet, he wasn't. I see that you are impressed by my usage of the astral projection jutsu, Naruto, the Hokage commented with a knowing smile. With it, I can appear anywhere within the village, relatively undetected. Naruto was left criticizing himself as the Hokage finally revealed the mystery behind his appearance. Of course, the figure standing before them was a projection. It was a relatively obscure jutsu with incredible versatility, but it was also very limited. One could only project their image to a place that was familiar to them, and they were also required to be within a reasonable distance. Shisui crossed his arms and nodded sagely. I understand completely, he stated, showing that he had knowledge of the jutsu as well. It's a pervert's dream jutsu, allowing one to spy on women undetected. How true. Naruto didn't want to imagine a world where Jiraiya-sensei knew such a jutsu. No women would be safe from his perverted gaze. In fact, the very idea of him peeking on someone like Lady Makoto made Naruto feel very uncomfortable. The Hokage laughed uproariously at Shisui's observation. If only I had the time to use it in such a manner, he commented, with his cheeks gaining a bit of a red hue. Though come to think of it, I am free every Friday afternoon. Lord Hokage. Naruto interrupted before one of his idols could embarrass himself any further. Surely you have a purpose for speaking with us. The Hokage instantly shifted into the state which Naruto was most familiar with, that of the calm, wise leader. Shisui noticed this sharp change as well, as he just as quickly straightened his posture. It then became clear to them that the Hokage would only go out of his way to speak with them if it was something serious. Hiruzen closed his eyes and placed his arms behind his back. As of this moment, especially after hearing your words, I consider you two to be among my most skilled and trusted subordinates, he confessed. Which is why, when presented with as daunting a task as the one I am about to give you, I only feel validated in my initial belief that you are indeed the most qualified for this mission. The world and even time itself seemed to freeze as they waited on his every word. That is why I must ask that you infiltrate Kumogakure no Sato, and deliver a message to our friend the Raikage. The day before a mission. Days like these were always the most simplistic, and by extension, the most enjoyable. It was less of a calm before the storm, and more of an opportunity to appreciate the things that he fought so fervently to protect. Sitting at the dinner table with his family, Izumi, Lady Makoto, Mito, and Sasuke, he felt secure in what he was about to do in the coming days. So, Naruto, what does this mission of yours entail? Makoto asked after everyone had explained how their day had gone. Naruto waited to swallow his food before responding. I'm not allowed to discuss it any further than we already have, Lady Makoto. Makoto hid her worry well and simply nodded before returning to her meal. Fugaku, on the other hand, noticed it clear as day, and very nearly sighed openly. His wife was as worrisome as they came, especially when it came to her children. The very thought made him frown as he continued eating. It was almost as if she expected them to be babies forever. Well, still, I'll need you to promise me that you'll stay out of trouble and keep safe. Understood. Makoto demanded with the authority of a parent. She had a bad feeling about this mission of his. Yes, ma'am. I will do my best. His answer seemed to satisfy her, as the ever so slight tension in her shoulders quickly dissipated. For Naruto, lying to Makoto was incredibly tricky. In reality, the risk involved in this mission was about as high as it got, and all it would take was one mistake for him and Shisui to perish, or worse, be captured by the enemy. Fugaku placed his chopsticks on his plate and gave his wife a sideward glance. The boy is an Anbu now, Makoto. Have a little faith in his abilities and stop worrying yourself to death every time he leaves the village. It was admittedly a bit weird hearing Fugaku openly express confidence in Naruto, yet, at the same time, it wasn't strange at all. While always a bit put off by his wife's insistence on making Naruto a fully fledged member of their family, he never once doubted Naruto's strength. In fact, there were likely few out there who knew more about how talented Naruto was than he did. I'm sorry for worrying about my son, Makoto responded calmly, though her tone was slightly edged, like a knife. Fugaku clenched his fist in an attempt to calm himself. For the last time, woman. That boy is not your. At the last moment, he stopped himself, but the damage was mostly done. Naruto continued eating his meal as if nothing had happened, while Izumi merely stared at her plate silently. On the other hand, Mito and Sasuke looked incredibly uncomfortable, as if they'd rather be any place than they currently were. Go ahead and say it, Makoto growled through clenched teeth. This had all been years in the making, really. Fugaku was sick of his wife's strange desire to take on Minato and Kushina's boy as if he was her own. Mito was more understandable, since she was taken on as an infant. Makoto raised her in the same way she did Izumi and Sasuke. But Naruto. Fine, I'll say it, he said, removing his napkin from his lap and placing it on the table. Naruto is a guest in our home, and while his impact is felt by us all, it does not make him a part of our blood. He already possesses our eyes, is that not enough? Shall he take on our name as well? Makoto was left speechless, and the entire kitchen was left completely silent. At this point, Mito was openly sniffling and doing her best to keep her tears from showing, and Sasuke was clenching his tiny fists underneath the table. Seeing this, Fugaku instantly felt regretful. He had allowed his stress to finally get to him, and said something he didn't really mean. Naruto stood from his seat, being the first to pierce through the painful silence. I have to begin preparations. Thank you for the meal, Lady Makoto. Without another word, he exited the kitchen, walked down the hall, and entered his room. That seemed to wake everyone up. Sasuke loudly pushed his chair back and ran into his room, slamming the door behind him with childish fury. Seeing Sasuke get so angry was the last straw for Mito, who began to openly bawl. Thankfully, Izumi was mindful enough to take the girl into her arms and bring her to her room. And with that, only the man and the woman of the house remained. Are you happy now, Fugaku? Makoto snapped with crossed arms. Predictably, her husband was conflicted in his response. Of course not, he countered. Now I'm a villain in my own home. Finally, at the breaking point, Makoto glared in a show of rage. Then maybe you should take a long look at yourself and wonder why that is. The last thing Fugaku saw of his wife for the entire evening was her back as she stomped away to their room, closing the door roughly behind her. Any reasonable man would surely make the assumption that he'd be sleeping elsewhere for the evening, and Fugaku was about as reasonable as they came. Sighing in a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion, he got to work cleaning the dinner table, which was usually a task his wife undertook alone. It made him appreciate her more than usual as he stared at the table before him. He hardly knew what to do with any of the leftovers, and it was quite daunting once he was reminded that he'd have to do this all on his own. Not a man to shy away from a challenge though, Fugaku got to work, starting with the most simple of tasks. How foolish I've been, he thought to himself as he washed dishes for what felt like the first time in years. For the longest time, he had been keeping his stress and anger bottled up inside, to the point where an eruption like tonight was only bound to happen eventually. Bearing the weight of the entire clan at a time in which relations with the village were at their worst ever, needless to say, he rarely slept. Right as he grabbed a rag to dry a now freshly cleaned plate, he froze as he just now noticed a presence behind him. His mind raced as he wondered who it could be. His enraged wife. His genius of a daughter present to explain how much he had just screwed up. Or worst case scenario, one of the little ones begging to know why he hated their older brother so much. After taking in a slow breath, he turned to face whatever it was he had coming to him. The climactic encounter never came to pass, however, as he looked upon a somewhat unexpected sight. His blonde charge was dutifully getting to work cleaning the table, placing leftovers into containers and stacking the dishes that needed to be cleaned. I'll clear the table while you clean the dishes, Lord Fugaku, Naruto said without looking in his direction. At a loss for words, Fugaku quietly watched in awe as Naruto did what he pretty much always did, persevere through hardship and come out the bigger man. He could have locked himself away in his room and lamented about the fact that he still hadn't been accepted into the family, but he didn't. No. He came out to help the very man that continued to push him away. Upon seeing this, Fugaku had only one question. Why? He asked, sounding far more stupefied than perhaps he had ever been in his entire life. Naruto finally stopped cleaning and turned to face his legal guardian, his expression calm, far beyond his years. Fugaku would never get used to just how intelligent and mature this boy was. It left him reminded of what it had felt like watching Minato rise through the ranks during his early years. Because, when I had nothing and nowhere to go, you took me into your home and gave me a place to live, Naruto explained, almost as if it were obvious. There will never be a day where I have finished paying you back for all that you've done for Mito and me. Helping you clean a kitchen table is the least that I can do. Without another word, Naruto continued on his way to the refrigerator and stacked the first of the leftover food away before returning to collect the rest. After finally getting over his shock, Fugaku got back to work cleaning up the remaining dishes, and in no time at all, the Dew had completed the task in no time at all. Once they were finished, the two stood awkwardly in the middle of the kitchen. Now that they didn't have a chore occupying their attention, the underlying tension that had been permeating through the air was now on full blast. It was quite clear that Naruto didn't know whether he should stay or leave and that Fugaku was racking his mind for something to say. In the end, it was Naruto who silently cleared his throat first, if that's all. It's not, Fugaku interrupted, almost wearily. Follow me, boy. It's about time we talked. As he often did, Fugaku turned without any further instruction and walked toward the door, clearly intending for his charge to follow. While Naruto remained oblivious to what Fugaku's true intentions were, he felt no need to disobey him, so he was at his heels almost immediately as they both stepped out of the house and onto the porch. The air was chilly and at their skin, but they both paid it little mind as Fugaku leaned forward onto the railing and stared up at the starlit sky. While he waited patiently, Naruto also admired the sheer beauty of the cosmos, quickly recognizing several of the constellations he had used in the past to navigate through the world past the village walls. You represent everything in which I was brought up to despise, Naruto, Fugaku suddenly confessed, and in a rare instance, called Naruto by his name. I don't understand, Naruto responded simply. Fugaku glared at nothing in particular. You're an Uzumaki, which essentially makes you a Senju in all but name, he explained. And you also have the Sharingan, the only thing the Uchiha clan still possesses that makes us worthy of any respect or prestige these days. There was a hint of resentment within his tone, but it was clear to Naruto that none of it was directed toward him. No, Fugaku-sama was expressing disdain for the Senju, and the higher-ups of the village. This was years and years of pent-up anger being released all at once. The one thing that made us different from everyone else, and the Senju now have it as well, he continued. They took control of the village and boxed us away in the outskirts as if we were rabid animals in need of monitoring. And now, one of their descendants has awakened our eyes as well. Everything was quickly becoming clear as Naruto listened to the pure truth being laid out before him. He actually straightened his posture as he listened to Fugaku list off all of the slights the Uchiha had faced since the Senju had taken control of the village decades ago. In a way, he felt guilty, even though he had no hand in any of it. And then, Fugaku's glare weakened. Yet despite my continued efforts, I cannot bring myself to hate you, he finished. I took you into my home with the hopes that I could at least use you to my advantage. If the Senju would mock me from beyond the grave by granting their descendant the sacred dojutsu of my clan, then I would at the very least make use of him. At this point, Naruto couldn't bring himself to look away from the man who was currently pouring his entire soul into his words. But despite my attempts to keep you at length, much like my wife, my son, and my daughter, you have become more to me than a mere guest, he finished, causing Naruto's eyes to widen. I brought the enemy into my home, and now I cannot help but look upon him with pride, in a way that a father looks upon his own son. Finally, Fugaku turned to face him. I don't know where this next mission of yours will take you, however I expect you to return home in one piece, he commented before walking past Naruto and back to the front door. Your mother would be devastated if something were to happen to you. Quick to compose himself, Naruto nodded resolutely without turning around. I will return, Lord Fugaku. The Uchiha patriarch hummed in acknowledgement before sliding the front door closed behind him as he likely went to get some much-needed sleep. It was likely that he'd find himself with a full night's rest for the first time in quite some time after finally getting so much off of his chest. Naruto, on the other hand, felt as if a tsunami of powerful emotions had just swept him away, leaving him crumpled up and exhausted. Today had been trying, indeed, topped off by an evening of ruction. At this rate, he'd hardly be able to get himself out of bed in the morning. But still, he'd be lying if he said there wasn't a pleasant warmth exuding from his chest. Acceptance. It felt good. Kumogakure no Sato was a beautiful village to behold. Located in a range of towering mountains, with much of the buildings and structures built into the mountain edges, elevating them to the point where they actually reached the very clouds themselves. In that regard, the village very much lived up to its name. Compared to Konoha, it was far more militaristic, imposing curfews on all citizens and having very few non-shinobi occupants. This allowed them to have a tremendous standing fighting force, but also led to their economy not being nearly as bustling as their forest-dwelling rivals. It was late evening when suddenly the sounds of people running throughout the streets, along with hurried shouting, filled the air. Soon after, an alarm pierced through the entire village, waking everyone and putting all shinobi on edge. It was the emergency signal, which was something only activated whenever the village was under assault. One of the village's elite shinobi, Darui, who had long been close with the Raikage and his family, was one of the first people alerted to the emergency. Apparently, much to the Raikage's humiliation, the village had been infiltrated, and the intruders were entirely unaccounted for, even after C attempted to sense them out. Whoever they are, they're skilled enough to use the chakra suppression jutsu, C commented as he and Darui stood atop one of the taller mountains in the area, granting them a good view of everything that was going on. It isolated them quite a bit from the rest of their comrades, giving them enough privacy to speak quietly as they waited. Darui appeared more tired than usual as he rubbed his eyes. Great, so you're saying that they can do whatever they please. C shook his head, not entirely. They're suppressing their chakra, so they can't use any ninjutsu or genjutsu, otherwise, they'll give themselves away. We'll just have to wait until they make a mistake, or are put in a position in which they are forced to reveal themselves. When that happens, I'll find them immediately. Still a bit skeptical, Darui merely sighed before sitting down on the mountain edge. The action earned him a confused look from C, who immediately began wondering if there was something wrong with his old friend. Something bothering you? Darui shook his head before sighing. You mean other than the fact that we're possibly facing a threat of invasion? Yeah, other than that, C responded, almost knowingly. With a sigh, Darui massaged his temples, a clear sign of his stress. It had to be difficult being the Raikage's right-hand man, especially during such turbulent times. The man who he had casually called his boss for much of his life had been changing drastically as of late. All of his actions were incredibly antagonistic, even when compared to Kumogakure's history of aggressive military objectives. Don't act like you haven't noticed it as well, Darui explained. The boss? He's been acting strangely over the past few years. This is the first time that I've ever felt like I'm on the bad side. C crossed his arms and kept his gaze fixed on the village. That situation with Konoha's Jinchuriki was certainly a mess, he acknowledged. And his vendetta against that Uzumaki kid as well. It's all so dull, Darui complained. To think I'd have to experience war in my lifetime. Before he had even finished getting through his sentence, he heard the barely audible sound of someone landing not too far behind him. He and C both turned around to see a masked individual, apparently affiliated with Konoha if the armor and distinct porcelain mask of their Anbu Black Ops. Finally, I've found you, the Anbu remarked, his voice far more upbeat than what one would expect, considering most in his position were stoic and unreadable. Darui's eyes narrowed when he noticed that the intruder seemed to be explicitly focused on C. Does he know that C is a sensory type? He thought to himself. But how would he? Before any more words could be exchanged, the Anbu unleashed a barrage of shuriken toward them, before spewing flames from where his mouth would be under the mask. Each of the individual shuriken was encased in flames, making them a tad easier to dodge in the darkness of the night, but far deadlier if not evaded. Still, the attack itself was rather straightforward, apparently done with the purpose of distracting and leading on to another, more effective maneuver. Due to his immense skill and experience, Darui was able to see the Anbu disappear in a blur of speed all while he simultaneously avoided the attack. I know. C interrupted before quickly turning around on a dime, evidently able to anticipate the intruder's movements due to his sensory abilities. Lighting style. Flash pillar. Electricity was discharged through C's body, creating a bright light that blinded everyone in the surrounding area. Having fought alongside his friend before, Darui managed to cover his eyes just in time, all the while keeping the rest of his sense on high alert in case of another attack. Darui was filled with newfound confidence. C was skilled in many regards, both as a sensory type and a medic nin, however, he was also deadly in combat. In the entire village, it was likely that there wasn't another shinobi more skilled in the use of genjutsu in battle. After waiting another few seconds, he opened his eyes and turned in C's direction. So what kind of hallucination did you put the guy under? C glanced toward him, perhaps to explain, but was then blitzed instantaneously as his head snapped back due to a vicious knee. It all happened too quickly for Darui to intervene, and before he knew it, his comrade was incapacitated, and he was left alone to fend against this mysterious intruder. The genjutsu didn't work. Darui mumbled to himself as he lowered himself into a fighting stance. The Anbu appeared to have heard him. Nah. Genjutsu is kind of my thing, actually, so your buddy was just unlucky, I guess, he responded, rather matter-of-factly, but Darui chose to assume that there was mocking laced in his voice. Darui removed the large cleaver he had been carrying on his back, and in response, the Anbu unsheathed his tanto. It was a much smaller weapon in comparison, but any Jonin-level shinobi was skilled enough to channel chakra through their weapons, enhancing them and making snapping through the thin tanto blade more difficult than it appeared. This is pretty brazen of you, isn't it? Darui asked. Don't you Konoha Anbu usually prefer to scurry in the shadows? Seemingly unaffected by the comment, the Anbu chuckled, we want you to know that we were here. That it was us. That's the whole point, he explained. Hard to interpret a message if you don't know who's sending it to you. You couldn't have just sent a messenger hawk. Darui joked before the two men began circling around each other, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Despite the casual nature of their conversation, the tension was incredibly high as the two men released their chakra, resulting in literal pressure being exerted in the surrounding area. Despite not being a sensor, Darui was easily able to tell that his opponent had incredibly potent chakra, leading him to believe that this was no ordinary Anbu. Your Raikage has made it clear that he has no interest in negotiating or reading letters, was what he received as a reply. Besides, even if we did come to an understanding again, your meathead of a leader would break any treaties he signs before the ink could even dry. Violence and force are the only languages he knows, so here we are. Darui smirked slightly. So there's more than one of you then. That's good to know. Whether it was because of the observation or because an opening appeared, Darui didn't know, but almost immediately after he spoke his opponent lunged toward him with immense speed, blade ready to decapitate him. Thankfully, he was able to block it with the flat of his sword before skidding back and creating space. I assume that between you and your partner, you're stronger, right? Darui asked. That would make sense, since you were the one sent to take out C, which is crucial to whatever you're planning. The Anbu's head tilted, and it was clear that he had no idea what his opponent was getting at. It was beginning to get difficult to tell if this was a battle of blades or words. Darui was doing his best to learn as much about these intruders as possible so that he could pass along the information to the boss once he was finished here. I'm just wondering if I'll need to conserve my chakra in this fight, Darui elaborated. But seeing as your partner is weaker than you, I can probably handle him easily enough after I'm finished here. Surprisingly, his remark earned another chuckle from the Anbu. Underestimating an opponent is one of the worst mistakes you can make, he countered. As the conversation continued to develop, Darui noticed a crow soaring in the sky above him. He thought nothing of it until many more appeared, resulting in what could only be described as a storm of birds flying around him and his opponent chaotically, blocking out the moon and making it difficult for him to orient himself. Noticing the absurdity of it all, and remembering that the Anbu had remarked that genjutsu was his forte, Darui focused his chakra throughout his body in an attempt to undo what was clearly some kind of illusion. As he did, the crows took it as their opportunity to, as a collective, fly in his direction all at once. Right as he managed to dispel the illusion, each of the crows morphed into a ball of flame, revealing that his opponent had been using genjutsu to mask his true attack. Thankfully, Darui was lucky enough to have an affinity for water, alongside his affinity for lightning, and weaved through hand seals faster than the human eye could track. Water style. Water prison. Just in the nick of time, water was expelled from his mouth, surrounding him in a sphere water that was highly difficult to penetrate from either the inside or outside. It was a jutsu typically used to trap an opponent, but Darui was bright enough to realize that he needed a defense that could protect him from all directions. The only con to using this jutsu as a defense was the fact that he needed to hold his breath while inside, which could lead to him drowning if he remained inside for too long. It worked just as he had intended, with each of the fireballs being extinguished almost immediately upon impact, creating hot steam that filled the surrounding area. However, just as he was preparing to release the technique, a much larger ball of flames came barreling toward him. He continued maintaining the jutsu, and it continued to hold up, protecting him from any damage. But all was not as well as it may have seemed. Darui's brow visibly furrowed as his opponent continued to pepper his protective sphere of water with various fire-style jutsu. Minutes soon passed, and Darui began to wonder what would give out first, his ability to hold his breath or his opponent's chakra reserves. He's leaving me with two options, Darui thought to himself. Stay in here and drown, or release the jutsu and be incinerated. How dull. For his sake, he hoped that he could come up with something soon. Otherwise, he and his village were in a heap of trouble. Located in a darkened alley, Naruto sat hidden within the shadows. He waited patiently, keeping himself occupied by maintaining his breathing patterns and preventing his chakra from fluctuating in a way that could reveal his position to the enemy. This wasn't his first infiltration mission, but it was undoubtedly the most high-profile and dangerous. He would need to be even more cautious than usual. He and Shisui had arrived in the land of lightning barely over 24 hours ago and spent that time planning out their next move before infiltrating the village in the late evening. It wasn't all that difficult, actually. For all their military aggression, Kumogakure had a far less sophisticated security system than Konoha. He and Shisui merely had to incapacitate one of the perimeter guards before sneaking in. As he sat contemplating what he would need to do in the coming hours, he sensed a presence approaching him from the entrance of the alley. He stood to his feet and waited patiently until he and the stranger were face to face. It was a Kumogakure shinobi, which was evident by his garb and headband. He had onyx eyes and ash-gray hair, which was kept in a ponytail. Most notable were his black-rimmed circular glasses. It is nice to meet you, Mr. Anbu, the stranger greeted casually with a sly smile. But I was under the impression that there would be two of you. Naruto crossed his arms and explained, my partner is currently dispatching of the village's sensory type so we can proceed uninterrupted, he said. The Kumo shinobi's smile widened, and he adjusted his glasses with his middle and pointer finger. He then reached behind his back and inserted his hand into the pouch he had attached to his waist. Naruto's eyes narrowed behind his mask as he instinctively prepared for some kind of attack, but was put at ease when the man simply removed what appeared to be a scroll. Don't you trust me? The Kumo shinobi teased knowingly, apparently having picked up on Naruto's apprehension. If he were a lesser man, Naruto would have rolled his eyes at the comment. You are a spy, he responded simply. It would be foolish to trust you. The man smiled, apparently in agreement before adjusting his glasses once more in what Naruto was quickly beginning to identify as a habit. He found this man to be quite odd, as he didn't portray the typical demeanor that Naruto expected from one of Danzo's root Anbu. In place of the standard emotionless visage, there was a man who appeared almost devious in nature. All of the promised intel is in that scroll, the spy commented, inclining his head toward the roll of parchment now in Naruto's possession. I must say, it was rather difficult to come by. It makes me wonder how you're actually going to get this done. Naruto placed the scroll in his pouch without any explanation. You're dismissed, he commanded, finding the spy's presence to no longer be needed. He received a silent chuckle and a resigned nod in response. Very well. I do hope to meet again someday soon, Mr. Anbu, he remarked before slinking back into the shadows like a cold-blooded reptile. Once he was finally alone, Naruto removed the scroll from his pouch, and his Sharingan sprang to life as his eyes darted over all the writing and imagery, instantly memorizing and categorizing the information into his mind. Overall, it was the intel was incredibly valuable, and made his task seem a bit less like a complete and utter fool's errand. The Kohaku no Johei, he muttered to himself, remarking on the object the scroll and his mission were both centered around. The Kohaku no Johei or amber purifying pot was one of the tools of the legendary sage of six paths. While most had gone missing over the roughly 1,000 years since the sage walked the earth, several of them somehow came into the possession of Kumogakure. Most of them were eventually stolen by the Gold and Silver brothers when they defected from the village, but the Kohaku no Johei still remained as their sole relic. Being able to infiltrate Kumogakure and steal their most valued artifact right from under their noses would be the best way for Konoha to show them that they weren't to be meddled with. It could also show the Raikage that they had other means of hurting him outside of merely killing his men, and could possibly trick him into making a mistake out of rage. Naruto read further into the scroll and finally came across the Kohaku no Johei's location. It was apparently hidden in an underground chamber below the base of the most massive mountain of the many that surrounded the village. The intel also spoke of a lone guardian in the chamber, but apparently, the spy hadn't been able to find out exactly who this person was. The likelihood of me getting out of here alive isn't very high, but when is it ever? He mumbled to himself before his thoughts went elsewhere. I wonder how Shisui is doing. Just give up, you stubborn bastard. Shisui complained in irritation after using another fire jutsu. You've been holding your breath for like 20 minutes. Darui simply shook his head and flipped him off from within the prison of water. With a shrug of his shoulders, Naruto banished the thought, I'm sure everything's going smoothly. After another few moments of waiting, he decided that it was likely that Shisui had taken out the sensory type by now. With that in mind, Naruto leapt out of the shadows and into the moonlit sky. His hands weaved through a familiar set of hand seals, and he was engulfed in a puff of smoke. When it faded in the wind, he was revealed to have used the transformation jutsu to disguise himself as a dark-skinned Kumogakure shinobi. He then landed on the street below and darted toward his intended destination, doing his best to look like an active-duty shinobi searching for intruders. Occasionally he would pass some other Kumo shinobi, but they all sprinted by without a second glance. His seemed to be working perfectly so far. Hey, you! A voice shouted from behind him, causing him to skid to a halt. Naruto turned around and saw 3 Kumo shinobi eyeing him up. His mind raced. Did they notice something? Yeah, he said as they all got a little closer. Have you seen anything yet? We haven't found shit, man, one of them complained before yawning, clearly exhausted. Naruto silently cleared his throat in nervousness. No, I haven't been able to find anything either, man, he replied, internally sweating. For all his talents, he'd never been much of an actor. Damn it. Another one of the men growled in frustration. Those Konoha trash must be lucky as hell. The second we find them, they're dead. I don't know if luck has anything to do with it. They seem pretty clever to me, Naruto countered without even thinking, earning several odd looks. I mean, clever by Konoha standards. Those tree-hugging bastards are stupid as hell, am I right? He was forced to remain composed as the other men merely blinked in his direction. Had he given himself away so carelessly? Reet, one of them said, clearly weirded out. Well, anyway, we're going to go search on the other side of the village now. I'm sure you have things handled over here. Before he could even say another word, the other men disappeared in bursts of speed. He instantly felt all of the tension leave his shoulders as soon as they were gone. He'd really need to work on his improv. Otherwise, the next time he was asked to infiltrate enemy territory, he'd be found out instantly. He was just glad Shisui hadn't been here to see that, or he would have never heard the end of it. After that, there were no interruptions, and he soon arrived at the entrance of the chamber. It was a massive pair of steel doors which were being guarded by only 2 men, far less than what was usually the case, but with intruders currently about, most shinobi personnel were out searching. What are you doing here? One of the guardsmen asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Shouldn't you be out looking for the enemy right now? It was subtle, unnoticeable to most, but Naruto's eyes quickly shifted crimson red, and before they knew it, the guard's eyes glazed over. Sometimes the most effective genjutsu were the kind that weren't all that powerful, using very little chakra being. It was like utilizing a needle to kill someone instead of a sword. If done correctly, it could get the job done all the same, without drawing as much attention. Lord Raikage sent me to check on the relic. He's worried that the enemy may be here to steal it, he explained, knowing that the genjutsu had taken full effect. Stay here no matter what you hear down below and don't let anyone else inside. The guards nodded in understanding. Yes, sir, they both drawled in unison before they each pulled out a key and inserted them into the door's 2 keyholes and turning them in opposite directions. It took a tremendous effort for the two men to pull the doors open, but with the physical strain clearly evident on their faces, they did so. The first thing he saw was darkness, as the entrance to the chamber didn't seem to have any lighting. Further down, however, he could very faintly see some torchlight. Not wanting to waste another moment, he silently descended the stairs. The whole experience actually reminded him quite a bit of the time when he and Izumi first entered the headquarters of the Anbu after they had been recruited. They were both deep plunges into worlds filled with the unknown, but he had a feeling that this particular journey would involve far more violence. Kumogakure wouldn't allow their most sacred item to be guarded by an amateur, so this would likely be an extreme test of his skills. He didn't quite know what he had been expecting, but it certainly wasn't what he got. The first thing he noticed upon entering the chamber wasn't the Kohaku no Johei he had come all this way just to retrieve, but rather, it was the absolutely ripped man sitting crisscross in the center of the room. He seemed to pay his visitor no mind as he mumbled under his breath and scribbled into his notebook. The man had dark skin along with his muscular build, as well as white hair and a goatee. On his right shoulder was a tattoo of the kanji for iron, ji, tetsu, and on his left cheek was a tattoo of a bull's horn. He also wore oval-shaped sunglasses and a white-colored forehead protector. He also has his village's standard one strap over one shoulder flak jacket, and a long, red rope belt tied around his waist, the standard kumo hand and shin guards, shinobi sandals, and a white scarf around his neck. Strangely enough, he also wore 7 swords on his back. Just as Naruto thought he had gone unnoticed, the man spoke, barging in this late as hella cruel, you teensy weensy baby fool, he said, seemingly speaking in rhymes. State ya business before I put you to sleep for good, ya fool. Naruto could only blink in surprise. Could it be possible that he had finally met someone that was stranger than Shisui? Lord Raikage sent me to retrieve the Kohaku no Johei. He fears that the intruders are here to steal it and wants to move it to a more secure location, Naruto explained, still under disguise, subtly using the same genjutsu he had used on the guards. So if you'll pardon me, I'll be taking it now. Naruto was unable to see the strange man's eyes due to his sunglasses, but he assumed that the genjutsu had worked since he didn't move at all. Taking that as his signal to proceed, Naruto began walking in the direction of the Kohaku no Johei. Shockingly, before he had made even 3 steps, the man disappeared in a burst of speed, and he felt a fist embedded in his abdomen. The force of the punch was so powerful that it sent him flying into the concrete wall of the chamber, demolishing a portion of the wall and instantly dispelling his transformation. The sheer force of the impact required him to gather his breath for a moment, and as the dust from the rubble began to dissipate, Naruto saw the silhouette of his enemy in the distance. He was engulfed in a cloak of bubbling red chakra that Naruto was instantly familiar with. While manifesting in a very different way, the feeling he was getting from the chakra was undeniably similar to what he felt during his fight with the Jinchuriki, Yugito. Another cough Jinchuriki, he mumbled to himself as he struggled back into a standing position. His cloak was now in tatters, so he removed it, revealing his Anbu armor underneath. Such confusion. Surprised I broke through your illusion. The bizarre man mocked with a grin. You fool, of course I'm a Jinchuriki, can't you see? 8 tails, that's me, da rapping killer bee. It would seem that he was now 2 for 2 when it came to encountering Kumogakure's Jinchuriki. Great. Darui was on his last legs at this point. Even for a shinobi, he could only hold his breath for so long, and his opponent didn't seem as if he'd be running out of chakra anytime soon. It was clear that to win this fight, he'd need to outthink his enemy, so he quickly began racking his brain for an unpredictable strategy. On the other side, Shisui was beginning to get a bit impatient. He would prefer to get this over with as soon as possible, so he could get back to Naruto and help with the retrieval of the Kohaku no Johei before one of them ended up getting killed. He was beginning to worry about his friend. There were countless shinobi scouring the streets right now, and even for someone as skilled as Naruto, navigating through that was incredibly dangerous. Shaking his head in irritation, he weaved through another string of hand seals and a massive fireball was sent careening toward the water prison. It almost felt pointless, since every one of his attacks had failed in both breaking through the defense and getting his opponent to surrender due to his desperate circumstances. Right now, he could really use a stroke of good luck. Then, Almost as if the universe had answered his prayers, the mist generated from the heat of his attack faded in the wind and his opponent was revealed to be face first in a pool of water. Shisui wasn't sure if he finally passed out or if he simply ran out of chakra maintaining the defense, but he really didn't care. All he was concerned about was that this was finally over. Deciding that binding and restraining his enemy rather than killing him was more his style, Shisui retrieved some shinobi wire from one of his various pouches and appeared next to the unconscious Kumo shinobi in a burst of impressive speed. It was only when he kneeled down to tie him up that he realized his mistake. His opponent was suddenly engulfed in black lighting, searing the skin on the palm of Shisui's left hand before he managed to teleport to a safe distance. The pain was incredible, but Shisui remained focused as he watched his apparently rather clever enemy return to his feet, with the same look of lazy boredom plastered on his face. That was supposed to kill you. How dull, he complained. You Konoha shinobi never make things easy, do you? Shisui smirked under his mask, the pain from his hand a mere afterthought. I could say the same about you, he remarked before his posture straightened. I'd like to learn your name. There was now an unspoken level of respect between the two men. It was the kind of respect that could only develop in the midst of battle, when the two participants realized that they were squaring off with someone that could very well take their life at any given moment. It was difficult to explain to those who had never seen battle before. The name's Darui, his opponent casually revealed. And while you hide your appearance well, I've already figured out who you are. Shisui of the Mirage. In response, Shisui merely shrugged his shoulders. Shisui of the what now? He asked. Never heard of him. Darui then massaged his neck in apparent soreness. Sure. Whatever you say, he said, clearly not believing a word of what he was just told. How about we get this over with? A particularly strong gust of wind carried through the area, rustling their hair and clothes, though, despite this, the two men stood as still as statues. Each patiently waited to see if the other would make the first move, which would undoubtedly spark the second round of their little dance. In an instant, Darui was no longer in his relaxed position as his hands quickly went through 5 hand seals, storm release, laser circus. He announced. First, a halo of bright energy spread around the Darui's hands as the jutsu was activated. Then it encircled his hands, and from that, several beams of lighting were sent straight at Shisui, who merely stood in place as they approached faster than most could ever hope to move. His Sharingan eyes closed under his mask and then the jutsu impacted, creating a cloud of dust and debris. Darui's eyes darted in all directions as he attempted to predict where Shisui could have possibly teleported to, but at no point did his enemy appear. It was then that his eyes widened in shock as the dust cleared, revealing something that he couldn't have envisioned occurring in his wildest dreams. Shisui remained where he stood, his body encased in what appeared to be some kind of ethereal green ribcage made from pure chakra. Then, before Darui's very eyes, the ribcage formed into a towering skeleton, which was then encased with flesh and then armor, finishing as a massive green avatar which resembled a fiendish-looking Tengu. Shisui stood at the center of this gigantic chakra construct, completely protected from all sides. I'm sorry, but I can't keep holding back, Shisui said, his Sharingan visibly glowing behind his mask, now taking the form of a 4-point pinwheel. Don't ask how I know, but I get the distinct feeling that my buddy is in danger. At the sight of his now seemingly insurmountable opposition, Darui could only manage to say one thing. How dull. Naruto stood stiff as a board, in a scenario that he quite honestly had never expected himself being forced into. A mere hour before he and Shisui were meant to depart for their top-secret mission, and here he was standing, silently watching his sensei peering through a spyglass at a group of women that had made the mistake of relaxing in a nearby river. Fools. Didn't they know that an insane pervert was on the loose? I have to say, the armor suits you, Jiraiya complimented with a sly grin. He didn't take his eye away from the spyglass for even a moment, and Naruto was quite confident that nothing less than Tsunade Senju herself inviting him into her bed could get him to do so. He was fully clothed in his Anbu attire, minus the mask, which he was holding in his left hand. He wore a travel pack including all essential items pertaining to the mission, including a hooded cloak that would better conceal his appearance. He shifted his hand onto his hip as he waited patiently for his sensei to explain why he asked to meet with him before he left. That time then seemed to finally arrive after Jiraiya got particularly excited by one of the women briefly stepping out of the water, revealing her fully body to his eye. Naruto, on the other hand, was decent enough to avert his gaze in defense of the poor woman's modesty. I'm going to be honest, kid. I don't think you're ready for this mission, he suddenly confessed, his voice now rather serious despite the bounty his eyes had just been gifted. But the old man wouldn't hear me out, so it seems that you're going anyway. The comment stung a bit. You tried to have me taken off of the mission? He asked, maintaining an even tone. Jiraiya shrugged his shoulder, evidently not at all ashamed. Look, you're no slouch, don't get me wrong, but this is your first mission with the Anbu, and that old coot is having you sneak into an enemy nation to steal a heavily guarded relic, he explained. That's something even I'd struggle to do, and I've been at this way longer than you, kid. I won't question Lord Hokage's decision, and neither should you, Naruto countered. And besides, there's always a risk of death in the life of a shinobi, and it would be an honor for me to die serving my home. Without any word of warning, Jiraiya lowered the spyglass from his eye and swiveled around to face his young pupil. He gave him a surprised look, with raised brows, before actually laughing as if he had heard the funniest joke of all time. Naruto could only be left trying to understand what was so funny in the first place, feeling a tad bit embarrassed. Seemingly finding it difficult to actually speak, Jiraiya needed a moment to compose himself. I always knew that you were a damned idiot, but this stroke of stupidity surprised even me, he managed to get out before chuckling again. You're still only a kid, so don't try and act so content to die. What would Mito do if you were to go and get yourself killed? Have you thought about that? It was then that a sound of feminine laughter in the distance caused Jiraiya to raise his spyglass once more, with a silly grin on his face. With that being the case, most would assume that his little lecture was over, and Naruto would have been counted among them. Subverting this expectation, his sensei decided that now was the time to demonstrate his skills in multitasking, where he continued to dispense wisdom while also peeping on oblivious women. Your parents died so that you could live, not so you'd foolishly throw away your life a few years down the road, he continued. Do you think Minato would have chosen death if there was any other option? No, he would have stayed alive to be with you and your sister. Do you realize how silly you sound in comparison, saying that you're willing to die and leave your sister behind just to retrieve some jar? Naruto was certainly glad that all of his sensei's questions thus far had been rhetorical, because right now he was actually at a loss for what to say in response. For the first time in a long while, he felt like an actual kid. He was never the kind of child that misbehaved in a way that resulted in him being lectured by his parents, so this was something new to him. Jiraiya scratched his cheek as he continued spying. You spend so much time trying to be selfless that it actually makes you blind to how fundamentally broken you are, he said, noticeably shifting the tone of the conversation. If you weren't so fixated on serving and protecting your loved ones, you might actually befriend some more people and learn to act like a healthy human being. Outside of your actual friends, who I can count on one hand with fingers to spare, how many people can claim that they've actually gotten to know you? Is this why you asked me to come here, Jiraiya-sensei? Naruto asked with crossed arms, feeling a tad bit defensive. Surely this conversation could have waited until after I returned from my mission. You idiot, have you not listened to a word that I've said? Jiraiya responded with a shake of his head and a slight elevation of his tone. I'm trying to keep my godson from going out and getting himself killed. This isn't a conversation that can wait. The sheer weight of the response nearly made Naruto's train of thought come to a screeching halt. These past few days had done a great job in presenting him with conversations that completely subverted his expectations. Last night there was his talk with Fugaku-sama, and now he was being lectured by a guy who he had grown to know as a carefree, perverted buffoon. I've seen your type before. The person who's lost everything, Jiraiya continued. You close yourself off from people because forming connections with others presents more opportunities to experience loss. And when you do actually manage to form bonds with others, you obsess over the possibility of them dying and train like a madman to protect them. You think that it's up to you to carry all of these burdens on your own, but it isn't. Naruto was beginning to feel a bit uncomfortable as this talk was beginning to hit a little too close to home for his liking. Was it because deep down he knew that his sensei was right? Probably, but it wasn't something that he could so quickly come to terms with without more time to reflect on the issue. Maybe he had been wasting his childhood in service of others when he should have been making friends and enjoying the simpler things, but that was how things played out. Besides, right now, he had a mission to worry about. I have to leave now, but know that I'll be mulling over what you've told me until we get a chance to speak again, Naruto finally said with a slight bow after finding his voice again. It was a lot to take in all at once, so I apologize if it didn't seem as if I was taking it seriously. He turned to leave but was stopped by a firm hand on his shoulder. He turned around and saw that Jiraiya had turned around to face him with a softened expression that he hadn't seen on the perverted sage's face before. It was the kind of look he remembered his mother and father giving him when he was a young child. Jiraiya didn't just view him as a student, he saw him as family. Wait, kid, there's still the reason I asked you to come here in the first place. I need to tell you something important, he said, revealing to Naruto that their conversation had gotten entirely off topic. There's someone that you need to know about before you infiltrate Kumogakure. With a slight incline of the head, Naruto gave him the floor to speak. I'm listening. Yugito Ni is not the only Jinchuriki that lives within the mountains of Kumogakure, Jiraiya explained, mentioning a name that Naruto instantly remembered. I doubt you'll encounter him, but if you somehow run into the Hachibi Jinchuriki, there's only one option for you if you're to actually survive. And what's that? Naruto asked, wondering if his sensei had a special plan already formulated. You run, Naruto. You run and don't look back. Present time. Naruto looked at the Hachibi Jinchuriki standing no more than 10 feet away from him, in an almost completely closed-off chamber, and couldn't help but curse his luck. Of all the people that would be guarding the Kohaku no Johei, it would be the one person that Jiraiya-sensei told him he'd need to avoid at all costs. Check it, ya fool, Killer Bee shouted with a grin. If you want to run, now's the time to choose. 'Cause once I get started I don't stop, and you're bound to lose, ya dig? Naruto's only response was to draw his tanto from its sheath. His sensei had never been one for hyperbole or exaggeration, so that meant that this man was someone that he couldn't hope to defeat at his current level. But even still, a retreat wasn't an option since he was the only thing standing between him and his mission objective. So the Hachibi Jinchuriki is the guardian of the Kohaku no Johei, Naruto commented out loud in an attempt to stall for time so he could come up with a plan. Killer Bee pointed at him and said, that's right. And it's Lord Hachibi to you. Ya dumbass phony. Were there any Jinchuriki out there that weren't complete weirdos? Before he could attempt to keep the conversation going any further, a chakra-conductive blade coated in lighting was thrown squarely at his face. His Sharingan activated instantly, and he was narrowly able to avoid being pierced. Keeping himself aware of the battle area, he was able to notice that his opponent had disappeared from where he had been standing. Relying on intuition and battle instinct, Naruto was able to detect another such blade coming toward the side of his head. Simultaneously, over his shoulder, he saw his opponent was now behind him, having caught the blade that he had initially thrown, now preparing to use it to stab him in the back. It would seem that he was using a diversionary tactic in an attempt to confine him. Faster than the human eye could track, Naruto formed the shadow clone hand seal, and in a puff of smoke, a perfect copy appeared. Without a moment's hesitation, it grabbed his arm and tossed him out of the way, getting stabbed in his place and dispelling as quickly as it had appeared. He doesn't want to give me an opportunity to think and plan my next move, Naruto thought to himself as he jumped back even further to create more distance. He won't commit to a particular strategy until he's tested me a bit. Rather than continuing his aggressive advance, his opponent immediately halted in his tracks and pulled out his notebook once again. Naruto remained on guard, not knowing if this notebook pertained at all to some kind of jutsu or plan, but he quickly realized that wasn't the case. Shadow clone. Bone. Stone. Zone. I'm in a zone. I just took out your shadow clone. Yeah, that's tight, Killer Bee mumbled to himself before scribbling it down in his notebook. He was apparently pleased enough with the rhyme to actually write it down for future reference. Not one to grant an opponent a break, Naruto weaved through a familiar set of hand seals, fire style, phoenix flower jutsu. As he'd seen them do hundreds of times before during training, the balls of flame honed in on their target with pinpoint accuracy. Not one to wait to see if an attack worked or not, Naruto blurred out of sight in an impressive showing of speed. Almost at the exact same moment, his opponent managed to expertly weave through each of the fireballs without taking his eyes off of what he was writing. Just as he finished dodging the jutsu, Naruto decided to take a page out of his own book and not give him enough time to even breath. He was already at his side with a Rasengan in his right hand, prepared to grind a hole through the Hachibi Jinchuriki's back. The attack seemed noteworthy enough to cause the shinobi rapper to lower his notebook for a brief moment. It was then that Naruto found his attack unable to reach, as he found himself restrained. Looking down toward his waist, he was surprised to see a gray octopus tentacle grabbing him from out of the ground, originating from Killer Bee's lower back. He had tunneled it through the concrete below so he could grab him from behind, once again taking advantage of blind spots. With a grin, Killer Bee chastised his far younger opponent. "The only one who gets to interrupt me is me, ya fool," he said, apparently taking issue with Naruto trying to kill him while he was busy writing. Though, after having said so, his attention shifted toward the rotating chakra sphere that was still continuously spinning in Naruto's hand. It was difficult to see what his expression was underneath his shades, but it was clear that he was surprised to see his opponent use such a jutsu. "That jutsu, it's the yellow flashes, no doubt. I saw him use it years ago in our first and only bout," Killer Bee remarked after staring for a few moments. Naruto's eyes widened behind his mask as his opponent essentially confessed to having fought his father in the past. Was this for real? Was he actually expected to fight against someone who managed to come out of an encounter with his father alive? Now Jiraiya Sensei's warning was making even more sense. This opponent was far beyond him. "Anything you want to say before I put ya away, ya fool?" Killer Bee asked, raising a blade and streaming lightning through it in preparation to run Naruto through. If that was how he wanted to play this, Naruto had a fitting set of final words: "Great clone explosion." Before Killer Bee could even so much as blink in response, Naruto, now revealed to be a clone, detonated in a blast that shook the very foundations of the room. At the surface above, the two gate guards remained impassive as they felt the ground tremor below them. They both remained visibly stoic, clearly still affected by the mind-altering genjutsu Naruto had placed on them earlier. "Should we check that out?" one of them asked, his voice monotone. The other shook his head. "He told us not to come down no matter what we heard, remember?" "True." Naruto braced himself behind a support pillar as the explosion rocked the entire room with a level of force that felt comparable to that of an earthquake. Being so far under the ground, in a fairly insulated room with no windows, the blast was far more powerful than it would have normally been. For a moment, he wondered if it had been overkill, but then he remembered who he was fighting. He likely survived that. "I need to get the Kohaku no Johei before he figures out what's going on," he thought to himself before making a beeline toward the back of the room, where the relic was still sitting, now unguarded. There was then a falter in his step when Naruto felt an unfathomable amount of chakra barreling toward him. He turned over his shoulder and saw that his opponent was now completely covered in a red cloak of bubbling chakra, with 8 tails and a set of horns. Killer Bee grinned, showing his now elongated canine teeth. "Yo, I'll squash you flat, split splat." He taunted before his attack landed, with enough force to crush much of the concrete floor below. It took a few moments for the dusk to settle, but when it did, Killer Bee found himself standing inside an empty crater, with a stone covered in paper bombs where his defeated opponent should have been. Before he could even make so much as a single rhyme, the paper bombs exploded. Naruto watched from his position on the ceiling, thankful for the fact that he made sure to practice the substitution jutsu so many times during his academy days. When the dust settled, he was unsurprised to see that the Hachibi Jinchuriki hadn't even bothered leaving the crater. The explosion hadn't done any damage whatsoever. "Without my cloak, I'd be up in smoke," he complained as he looked around the room in an attempt to find the pesky intruder. "Gotta thank 8 tails when I'm done, son." It took all of his years of training and self-control to keep from allowing panic to overtake him. Nothing was working. He wasn't fast enough to catch his opponent off guard, none of his attacks were strong enough to do any real damage, and he had no chance of getting the Kohaku no Johei when the Hachibi Jinchuriki knew that was what he was here for in the first place. Then out of nowhere, he felt a searing pain in his leg and looked down to a red chakra arm grabbing his ankle. With no chance to escape, he was unceremoniously slammed into the ground below, feeling several of his bones break during the impact. Adrenaline was the only thing that kept him conscious, but with the severe burns on his leg and bones broken in both his ribs and left arm, it wasn't likely that he'd be conscious or alive for much longer. Even with his now blurred vision, he was able to see his Jinchuriki opponent leap into the air above him, apparently intent on ending things here and now. He attempted to move his body, but a jolt of pain prevented him from doing so. He could only watch on as his death appeared imminent. And now I'll end the show with a killer blow. For a split second, Naruto felt a lingering desire to give up as he saw his chakra-clad opponent inching closer and closer. His Sharingan only served to make his death appear to happen slower, but he knew that in all likelihood his body was too weakened to react anyway. Then, in that moment, he saw a multitude of faces flash before his eyes. Mito, Sasuke, and finally Izumi. In an unexplainable turn of events, he ignored the unspeakable pain and managed to roll himself to the side, just a bit. He felt the Hachibi Jinchuriki's arm slam into the ground right where he had been lying, and knew that he would have certainly died had he surrendered to his fate. Even still, his close proximity to the impact caused him to be launched into one of the several support pillars lining the room. At that point, the pain was just a dull throb to him, and he was quickly able to recognize that his sheer desire to live was the only thing keeping him going. Thinking on his toes, he took note of the other support pillars in the room and quickly came up with a plan. Using his good arm, he fished out all of the remaining kunai and paper bombs from within his weapons pouch. So puny, yet so bothersome, Killer Bee mumbled to himself before standing up to face his Anbu opponent. He then smirked casually when he noticed that the brat seemed like he was going to try and get him with paper bombs again, as if he hadn't been shown already that doing so was basically useless. Therefore, B felt no need to move as the kid pulled his arm back to throw the kunai knives. Can't you learn, you little worm? You think some paper bombs will make me squirm? He rapped before pausing before completion when he noticed all of the thrown kunai miss him by a mile. He turned and saw them each planted in the pillars on the other side of the room, and was finally able to realize what the little bastard was planning. He bent his legs in preparation to move, but for the third time in their fight, he was unable to react in time as an explosion bigger than all that preceded it rang out through the large chamber. Many of the pillars collapsed and chunks of the ceiling began to rain down, creating a cloud of dust that made it impossible to see anything. His chakra cloak defended him from any of the damage, but he was forced to strain his eyes as he attempted to spot his little troublesome opponent. This plan of his was clever, he'd give him that, but even with the element of surprise, there wasn't any kind of ambush assault he could do that would actually damage him. If he had something like that in his arsenal, he would have used it anyway. No ambush came, however, and he was left practically scratching his head until he figured out what was going on. That little bastard knew he couldn't win the fight, so he was creating a diversion to steal the Kohaku no Johei. While still unable to see, Killer Bee still knew where the relic was in proximity to him, and as quickly as possible shot in that direction. Thankfully, he seemed to arrive just in time, as he managed to see the silhouette of the little blonde brat about to pick the pot up. He intercepted him just in time and pinned him against the wall with his forearm. He watched the kid squirm and then glanced over to his left to make sure that the Kohaku no Johei was still where it was supposed to be. Nice try, little guy, he complimented with a grin. But you ain't. Before he could finish, the blonde Anbu brat that he had been pressing into the wall burst into a cloud of smoke. B blinked for a few moments before turning back toward the Kohaku no Johei. Noticing something odd about it, he walked to the relic and touched it with his palm. As soon as he did, it too burst into smoke, and when the smoke faded, all that remained where the relic had been was a single green leaf. The symbol of Konohagakure. Damn, was all he could say, for once short for words. It took tremendous effort to continue moving in his current state, but Naruto managed to navigate the streets of Kumogakure with relative ease. He and Shisui had already mapped out specific escape routes in the village, including roads that were less likely to be patrolled, etc. At the moment, he was too injured to even use the transformation jutsu, so he was currently relying on using stealth to hide in the shadows. Now that he had escaped immediate danger to his life, his body chose to suddenly remind him of just how damaged it was. Each step felt like someone was jabbing at his broken ribs, or as if boiling hot water was being poured in his leg. The searing, Burning pain in his leg was similar to the pain he experienced when receiving his injury against the Nibi Jinchuriki, which served as further proof of the sheer potency of Biju Chakra. I have to find Shisui, he thought to himself, doing his best to keep his mind focused on the mission and not on the pain. Don't move. The voice he heard could only be described as entirely stoic, and as he looked up, he noticed a kunoichi with blonde hair and notably large. She was armed with a tanto, though thankfully, unlike his previous opponent, her chakra was not otherworldly. I'm afraid I'm going to have to, Naruto responded, and the moment he shifted his right foot slightly, she launched herself toward him. Halfway toward him, she saw a pair of crimson eyes, and she immediately felt her entire body seize up, and she collapsed to the ground. Overall, it had taken no more than a second, and she could only helplessly watch as the intruder limped onward as if she hadn't even gotten in his way in the first place. Naruto Uzumaki, she thought to herself as he walked out of sight. There was only one person in the world with Sharingan eyes and blonde hair. She recognized him immediately. It was the last thing that crossed her mind before she finally lost consciousness. How? Was all Darui could get out as he laid flat on his back, unable to move his body even an inch. For what it was worth, Shisui did appear slightly winded as he stood over his now defeated opponent. Using his Mangekyo was always incredibly stressful, especially when he needed to use the Susanoo. It felt like all of his cells were on fire and that his bones were being crushed under the weight of an entire building. This was pretty fun, but I have to go now, Shisui responded, but before he left, he looked back down toward his enemy one last time. Darui felt as if ice water was injected into his veins as he stared into the almost demonic Sharingan eyes glowing through the holes of his opponent's mask. The killer intent he was bombarded with was unlike anything he'd ever experienced before, as even the sheer weight of the Raikage's rage paled in comparison. Next time we meet, I'll kill you. Darui of Kumo. Then, like a phantom in the night, he vanished. He appeared quite some distance away, atop a building that gave him a relatively adequate view of the village. He was confident enough in his comrade to assume that he'd successfully retrieved the Kohaku no Johei. Now, it was his responsibility to find him so they could get the hell out of here. It took about 5 minutes of searching until he finally found Naruto. He was clearly very injured, to the point where only basic stealth was possible for him as he limped through the shadows as best he could. Naruto. He whispered harshly, loud enough to where he could be heard while still not alerting anyone else nearby. Without a second thought, he teleported to his friend's side and put his arm over his shoulder to support his weight. Are you okay? He asked, receiving a tired nod in response. Where's the target? Without a word, Naruto handed him a scroll, which he assumed had the Kohaku no Johei sealed inside of it. As he took it and placed it into his pouch, he wondered what kind of opponent would be capable of giving Naruto such a beating. The last time he recalled Naruto being in such a state was after his fight with Yugito Ni, and even then it was nothing this serious. We need to see to that leg, buddy, he said before smiling warmly. But you did it. Good job. Naruto couldn't stop himself from smiling as well. Shisui's smile was always so contagious, mostly due to the fact that it was so genuine. Then, however, he remembered their situation. They were in enemy territory, and he had just finished a fight against the strongest person he'd ever faced in his life. They were far from safe. We need to hurry, Naruto warned, sounding as if he remembered something horrible. He's probably right on my heels. Who is? Predictably, he was interrupted as someone crashed into the ground directly behind them. Shisui's eyes widened as he took note of the fact that the man was cloaked in bubbling orange chakra. While he'd never met one before, he was obviously now face to face with a Jinchuriki. He'd never felt so much chakra in a single person before. Only Naruto's came close, but at least this felt like it belonged to a human. The man inside of the chakra grinned, revealing sharpened canines. Found ya fool. This a friend of yours? Shisui asked, though he received no response from Naruto, who at this point had completely lost consciousness. He almost made a cheeky comment about how things possibly couldn't get any worse, but just as he did, he felt another, equally powerful presence crash down roughly 10 paces behind him. Apparently, it was customary for people in Kumo to crash onto the ground like a meteorite. It was most likely done in a way to look as badass as possible. Shisui could dig it. You bastards. The new arrival shouted, and Shisui's eyes nearly popped out of his mask when he recognized this new threat as the Raikage himself, cloaked in pure lightning. This man was regarded as arguably the strongest of all the 5 Kage, and if not that, he was definitely viewed as the most powerful when it came to raw physical strength. It was said that back in the day, the only person who was faster than him was the Yellow Flash, Naruto's father, which spoke volumes about how incredibly gifted this hulk of a man truly was. Brother. After Shisui heard the Jinchuriki address the Raikage as his brother, he comically looked back and forth between the two men and noted that there was a pretty good resemblance. They were both physically impressive enough to where they looked more like professional bodybuilders than actual shinobi. B. The Raikage spoke menacingly. Let's do it. Shisui felt the hair on the back of his neck as he prepared for what was about to happen. Okay, brother, he heard the Jinchuriki respond, and without another word, the two men both blurred toward him with astounding speed. With his Sharingan activated, he was surprised that it was still rather difficult to predict the Raikage's movements due to his insane speed. He and his brother both closed in on him in about the blink of an eye, and they each had one of their arms extended, as if they were going to take off his head in a coordinated attack. The attack inched closer and closer, and just as it was nearly an inch away from striking true, he heard them both shout. Double lariat. After meeting her squad for the first time, Izumi was wondering how she would fit in with them. Even before the initial meeting, she was skeptical of whether or not she'd be able to relate to them due to the inevitable gap in age. Despite this, she honestly felt that such issues would be quelled due to the fact that the Konoha Anbu Black Ops was a bastion of discipline and professionalism, and she assumed that her squad would reflect all of these characteristics. She was wrong. In fact, her squad was just about the opposite of what she had expected it to be. Now, as she was traveling along with her new comrades to a team meeting, she couldn't help recall how things had begun. A few minutes prior, the first thing Izumi noticed upon entering the locker room was that everyone in her squad was already wearing their masks, leaving her as the only one with her face and identity unconcealed. It didn't really bother her, frankly, since she pretty much assumed that they would all know who she was anyway. Not that she was arrogant, but there weren't many 11-year-old prodigies in the Uchiha clan. I've been assigned to the Anbu as of today, Izumi stated after hearing the door close behind her back. My name is Izumi Uchiha. I'd appreciate your guidance. For the most part, her entrance didn't receive much attention from her new comrades. She counted 4 in total, outside of herself, and for the most part, they all appeared to be males based on what she could see. While much of their appearances were concealed due to their masks, it was quite evident that they were all somewhere in the age range of late 20s to mid-30s. She absent-mindedly observed one of her new comrades, who appeared as though he was approaching 7 feet, 2.1336 meters, tall, when she was approached by another, far more average-looking man. Oddly enough, he removed his mask, so Izumi was able to take in his short brown hair, black, almond-shaped eyes and his unique Happyuri-style forehead protector that framed his face. Ah, so you must be the new one. I'm Tenzo, he greeted friend Lily enough with a slight smile. You can use the locker furthest to the back. We have you positioned so you won't have to worry about any wandering eyes while changing. Izumi noticed a definite narrowing of the Tenzo's eyes as he glanced over at a particular Anbu operative, who she assumed was more than likely the person with the wandering eyes, to which he had referred. The apparent pervert seemed about average in terms of stature, which only made him appear rather comical standing in the same vicinity as the hulking giant she had noticed earlier. Though in reality, she was hardly one to talk, considering the fact that she was now by far and away the shortest member of the squad, and perhaps in the entirety of the Anbu Black Ops. You know, one of our members was pretty excited to learn that you'd be joining our squad, Tenzo continued as he directed her to where her locker would be. She's the only other woman in the squad, so you two have lockers next to each other. After turning the corner of the divided section of the locker, Izumi was greeted with the sight of a female Anbu, just as Tenzo had promised. She actually appeared to be quite young, with a lithe 5.5 foot, 1.6764 meters, build and waist-length straight purple hair. Her features were hidden behind her mask, so as she turned to face them, Izumi wasn't quite sure what her reaction was. Tenzo patted her lightly on the shoulder before turning to head to his own locker. All right then, I'll leave you ladies to it then. The captain will be here in about 5 minutes to gather us all for a meeting, so try to be ready by then. As he left, Izumi was left awkwardly alone with the purple-haired woman, who seemed intent on staring at her without saying a single word. Then, she stood to her feet and removed her mask, revealing a beautiful face with warm, brown eyes. She then smiled and extended a hand, and Izumi was quick to place the tray of Anbu attire she had been given on the bench so she could reciprocate the gesture. Hi, I'm Kat, the girl greeted, revealing her codename. But you can call me Yugao when we aren't on missions. Izumi nodded in understanding. I'm Izumi. I haven't been assigned a codename yet. Yugao's smile widened a bit, and she gestured toward what Izumi assumed was her new locker. Accepting the verbal cue, Izumi put on her armor, opting to simply put it over her regularly shinobi attire. This left her with a standard Uchiha high-colored black shirt underneath her gray Anbu vest, straying from the standard sleeveless shirt that most Anbu, including Yugao, tended to wear. Furthermore, she retained her shinobi sandals and white ankle wraps in place of the shin-high sandals that the Anbu had provided for her. I wouldn't worry too much about your codename, Yugao continued. The captain is the one who gets to decide what yours will be, and for the most part, his choices are agreeable enough. Though, I imagine Tenzo would disagree. Izumi blinked in confusion, instantly remembering Tenzo as the nice man who was the first to speak with her. What do you mean? What's wrong with his codename? An amused look passed over Yugao's face, and she shook her head mirthfully. It's better that you don't know, she responded in a low voice. Everyone just calls him Tenzo during missions anyway. He claims he prefers it since the name apparently has some sentimental value, but honestly, I'd wager it's because the captain gave him pretty much the most ridiculous codename possible. It would appear that her new captain was a man with a sense of humor, either that or a mean streak. Either way, Izumi would do her best to stay on his good side, which she was planning to do anyway since she didn't accept subpar performance as a shinobi, and her tenure in the Anbu would be no exception. Hopefully, she'd be able to meet all of his expectations. You know, everyone here's going to try and act all cool, like they haven't heard of you, but we've all heard the rumors, Yugao continued, in what Izumi assumed as a compliment. I mean, we're Anbu, so we've all been considered exceptional youths when compared to our peers, but not to the same degree as you, at least not from what I've heard. Thank you, but I still have a lot to learn, Izumi responded. You've been very helpful so far. Yugao's back was to her, but Izumi was still able to see the flattered smile that passed over her face. It was evident that up until now, she had been the little girl of the squad that everyone needed to help out, but now she was getting to learn what it felt like to be a mentor to someone. It had to have felt good, Izumi thought to herself. Maybe she'd get to feel that someday. It was then that the locker room door opened once again, and everyone gathered to the middle of the room to stand before the visitor. Izumi felt Yugao guide her along, and she knew pretty quickly that she was likely about to meet her new captain. When she saw him, she noted that he was anything if not unique. He had spiky silver hair which seemed oriented to his left side, along with an Anbu mask that she instantly felt was much more interesting looking than her own, which was very dull in comparison. For a moment, she felt like she saw something odd through the left eye hole of his mask, but it was too dark for her to see anything clearly. Captain, Tenzo greeted, being the first to speak. The new recruit arrived on schedule. Ah, that's good, the captain remarked. His voice sounded far more laid back than she had anticipated. At least we know she can arrive on time. The other members of the squad moved to the side so that the captain could stand before her directly, and Izumi could only stand awkwardly as he seemed to observe her silently. His eyes were completely hidden from view, so the only cues she could get of what he was thinking were from unintentional physical movements, like posture. She was surprised when even the way that he was standing gave away anything about what he was thinking. Weasel. Izumi blinked back twice, and it took all of her self-control to stop herself from merely replying with an undignified, huh. After a second of composing herself, she straightened her posture and spoke, pardon me, sir. Her captain tilted his head and responded, sir. He seemed to ponder out loud. How do you know that I'm a sir? I could very well be a woman. Are you a woman? No. The first thing that came to Izumi's mind was that this man reminded her of Shisui. You said weasel, captain, she elaborated, deciding to use a gender-neutral title when addressing him to avoid any more of his blatant teasing. It took the man a moment before he spoke once more, ah, yes. That's your codename. Weasel. We all have one. Her captain then pointed to himself. I'm Dog, but you can just call me Captain, he explained before gesturing toward each of her new squadmates one by one. That over there is Cat, he said as he pointed to Yugao. Don't let her cute little demeanor fool you, she's pretty much death on legs. Izumi could practically see the blush from behind Yugao's mask at the compliment, and she was quickly beginning to realize that her new teammate wasn't very good at handling compliments or praise. It was rather amusing, actually, and it was clear that the captain knew this too, which was probably why he complimented her in the first place. The captain then pointed to the giant man she had seen earlier. This here is Bull, he explained. Fitting, right? I wanted to call him Mouse as a joke, but who would risk angering that giant? He's a real softy when you get to know him though. The giant in question didn't appear to react at all to the comment, which led her to believe that he wasn't, in fact, a softy. From underneath his armor, which like all standard Anbu attire was very form-fitting, only really covering the chest, back, and forearms, she was able to see that he was absolutely jacked. He also appeared to be bald, which was visible from behind his mask. Next on the list is Badger, the captain continued, gesturing toward the man that she earlier identified as the squad pervert. Overall, a pretty good guy with some great taste in literature. He's been on this squad longer than anyone else here, including myself, so be sure to speak with him if you have any questions about how things work here in the Anbu. Badger gave the captain a thumbs up while at the same time appearing to be reading from a copy of what appeared to be one of those erotic novels that Naruto's godfather Jiraiya was known to write. That right there confirmed his perverted nature, while also hinting at the possibility that her captain also considered himself a fan of Makeout Paradise. Overall, Badger looked pretty average compared to Bull, with brown hair that seemed to be swept back, along with a slightly tan complexion. And who could forget Bird, the captain said, still not sounding all that enthusiastic at all, tilting his head to another member of the squad. He's our resident infiltration specialist, so make sure to ask him for advice if you ever feel as though your stealth skills are inadequate. The comment made Bird cross his arms, and Izumi swore that she heard the man scoff. This didn't go unnoticed by the captain, whose gaze seemed to linger on him for a few moments before moving on. It made Izumi wonder if Bird had an issue with the captain, or with her, but she wasn't able to dwell on it for long as the captain seemed to finally be wrapping up his little introduction as he finally got to Tenzo. Either way, the man had spiky straw-colored hair and a mask that was shaped with a bird beak. And last but certainly not least, Tenzo, the man in question hurriedly interrupted before the captain could finish. As I said earlier, you can call me Tenzo. It's nice to have you on the team. The captain appeared to sigh behind his mask. Ah, Tenzo, we talked about this, didn't we? He said in what appeared to be his best rendition of a lecturing tone. You can't keep shying away from your codename. I spent quite a while choosing it for you, and it isn't fair of you to just toss it to the side. I appreciate the thought, Captain, but I'm fine with Tenzo. Thank you. The last thing that crossed Izumi's mind as in her new team funneled out of the locker room for an apparent meeting at a local training ground was that they were all a lot more eccentric than she had anticipated. Back in the present, they all arrived at the training ground at about the same time. Izumi marveled at how Bull managed to land without any sound whatsoever despite his massive frame, and the rest of the group formed a makeshift circle as they seemed to prepare for the captain to speak first. All right, the topic of today's meeting will be explaining to Weasel here how Squad RO works, he began. As you may know, we're Lord Hokage's personal squad, so we're held to an even higher standard than the rest of the corp. Don't allow that to go to your head though. Izumi merely nodded. So far it was all stuff that she already knew. Rarely does the entire squad get assigned to a single mission. Tenzo spoke up, and Izumi realized that anyone in the squad could speak up during meetings if they felt they had anything relevant to say. Most of the time we're assigned to do missions as pairs or as individuals. Only during times of war or emergencies do we all need to assemble together. In all honesty, Izumi expected otherwise, but she wasn't surprised. It was more efficient having a single Anbu squad taking on several missions at once, in place on having them all only complete one together. Still, it meant that she would at least need to form amicable relationships with all of her new squadmates since it was possible she could be paired with any of them for missions. On the one hand, it didn't seem all that bad, since she already felt comfortable around Tenzo and Yugao. However, even now, she could practically feel Bird giving her the stink eye, which led her to believe that things may not be completely peachy. Well put, Tenzo. You're a gentleman and a scholar, the captain complimented in his laid-back, almost lazy way. Anyone else have any input for our new comrade? Never use anyone's real name in the field, Badger said, his perverted novel now nowhere to be seen. It seems obvious, but over the years, I've seen plenty of people slip up and call someone by their real name in the heat of the moment. Worst case scenario, it'll put your comrade and their loved ones in danger, so try to be careful. Izumi nodded once more. Thank you. I'll be sure to be mindful of what I say. She could see why it would be easy to slip up and call someone their name by mistake. In fact, she already noticed that she was thinking of Yugao by her actual name and not by Kat, her codename. If they were to go on a mission together right now, she'd need to make a conscious effort to not accidentally reveal her identity to the enemy. Speaking of watching what you say, keep your mouth shut about any classified information that comes to your attention, Bird said no spat. Especially when you're back in your little clan compound. The comment was quick to earn a response from the captain. Ishido, that's enough. Bird, whose real name was apparently Ishido, was fast to reply, we're all thinking it, Captain. Having someone from that clan on our squad. The captain said enough. Ishido, Yugao interrupted, her hands on her hips in a clear showing of irritation. Keep your prejudices in your head where they won't get you into any trouble. Prejudices. Bird repeated, sounding both surprised and annoyed. I'd better describe it as logic. You're in the Anbu. You should know the Uchiha better than most at this point. I don't know what Lord Hokage was thinking putting. Bird was interrupted once more, but this time it was by a hand being placed on his shoulder. The hand, which would be better described as a paw due to the sheer size of it, belonged to Bull, who was looming behind Bird like an intimidating shadow. Obey. The captain, Bull instructed, speaking in a slow and methodical voice, which was every bit as deep as Izumi expected it to be. To his credit, Bird hardly seemed intimidated, and he simply crossed his arms and shifted his attention elsewhere. Meanwhile, Izumi simply watched the whole debacle with an impassive gaze, though it was all hidden behind her mask. She was no stranger to the tensions between her clan and the rest of the village, so she wasn't surprised that one of her new squadmates didn't seem to trust her all that much. Silence then reigned, an awkward silence that left the majority of the squad looking to one another in order to figure out what to do. It was finally the captain who spoke, ending the meeting and letting everyone know that they would be taking missions starting tomorrow. Bird was the first to leave, vanishing in a body flicker. He was quickly followed by Badger and then Bull, who departed in a similar manner. It was just her, the captain, Yugao, and Tenzo now. Izumi, the captain then said, his voice oddly serious. I wasn't aware that Bird's ability to control himself would be compromised with you on the squad. If you wish, I can speak with Lord Hokage on your behalf. Izumi was quick to dismiss the severity of the altercation. It's fine, Captain. I'm not bothered by it, she explained. I'm aware that there are tensions between my clan and the rest of the village. It isn't something that I intend to shy away from or ignore. This is simply what I will have to deal with. Though his face remained hidden behind his mask, it was clear to Izumi that the captain still remained slightly unconvinced. Regardless, her assurance seemed to ease his worries enough, and he told the remainder of the squad to relax and prepare for missions the following day. He then gave them all a casual thumbs up before vanishing into thin air. For her first day of active duty, Izumi was unsurprised to discover that she would be working with Yugao or Kat in this particular case. Today would be simple patrol duty as they'd monitor for any suspicious activity and just overall take measures to keep the peace within the village. It wasn't precisely the special ops, covert kind of mission that she had been expecting, but not all missions could be like that, she supposed. The two teenage girls hopped from rooftop to rooftop with practiced ease as their eyes scanned the surrounding area. Meanwhile, Izumi subtly took mental notes of Yugao's behavior so that she could learn as much as possible from her new senior comrade. At the moment, however, things were kind of slow, so there wasn't really all that much to learn or observe. After a while, they came across something that warranted their attention as they noticed what appeared to be a crowd forming in the middle of what was usually a busy marketplace. At the center, and evidently, the cause of the commotion, was a fight taking place between two men. They both appeared bruised up, and at this point were wrestling with each other on the ground. Well, here's our first task for the day, Yugao remarked as she casually observed the dispute. Izumi was admittedly a bit perplexed. Doesn't this seem like a task for suited to the police force? Yeah, but we're here, and they aren't, Yugao retorted with a simple shrug. There's no point in us just ignoring it and waiting for them to show up. So go ahead and take care of it. Me. While it was impossible to see, Izumi could easily imagine Yugao rolling her eyes underneath her mask. Of course. The whole reason we're out here is for you to gain some experience, she explained. Now, just go down there and push your weight around a little. That usually gets the job done. Not needing to be prompted any further, Izumi nodded in confirmation before leaping from the rooftop and landing directly next to the altercation in question. Much of the crowd that had been surrounding the scuffle took a cautious step back when they took note of her mask and armor, but the two that were fighting hardly even seemed to notice that she was there. Then, a gust of chilly air seemed to blow over the two men, and they froze in place as if they had been approached by a ghost. Slowly, they turned to face the figure in question, and their eyes nearly popped out of their skulls when they saw a masked child with demonic red eyes gazing down at them. Return to your homes. The voice, augmented and terrifying, was enough to make them comply, and they and the rest of the crowd ran away with their tails tucked between their legs. Finally, the street was empty, and for a few moments, there was complete silence before Izumi heard uproarious laughter directly behind her. She turned and saw Yugao casually perched on the edge of a nearby rooftop, apparently having found the display to be amusing. I'm certain those two won't be causing more trouble anytime soon, Yugao complimented. Well done. Izumi was pleased by the praise. Now, this may seem tedious, but it's a part of the job that you'll need to get used to, Tenzo explained, as he and Izumi navigated the thick forests that made up the outside of Konoha's walls. Izumi was beginning to notice that much of her job would involve patrolling. During times of peace such as these, there was little need for her and her comrades to be sent on assassination and espionage missions, so now it appeared that their primary duty was protecting the village from outside threats. I don't mind it, Izumi responded as they took a moment to rest on a particularly large tree branch. I enjoy the forest. Tenzo hummed behind his mask. You truly are a strange youth, he remarked, causing Izumi to tilt her head in confusion. I mean it as a compliment, of course, Tenzo quickly continued. Most your age are eager to leap headfirst into action. Yugao was like that when she was first recruited into the squad. Taking her out on missions like this was like pulling teeth. The thought of a younger Yugao pestering her superiors from a chance at some actual action brought a small smile to Izumi's face. That sort of eagerness to prove yourself reminded her a bit of Sasuke and Mito, and she wondered if she could ever recall a time in which she had ever been that way. From what her parents told her though, she had always acted well above her age. How often do you encounter suspicious activity out here? Izumi questioned, changing the subject. Tenzo shrugged. Some days are slow like today, but most of the people that we apprehend out here are smugglers attempting to import and export illegal goods in and out of the village. They're easy enough to handle though. And then there are the spies attempting to disguise themselves as migrants and merchants. Those are a lot harder to fish out, he continued. Normally they're the people that you'd least expect. Kids, the elderly, and women posing as mothers. Are people ever falsely detained under suspicion of espionage? The question seemed to make Tenzo pause for a moment before responding. I'm sure that it happens all the time, but people like that are usually cleared during the vetting process, he explained, leading Izumi to nod in understanding. It's tough, though. A lot of them are sleeper agents with falsely implanted memories, so sometimes they don't even know that they're spies. With the growing tensions between the village and Kumogakure, it was very likely that there would be even more such people attempting to flood the village every day. Historically speaking, Iwagakure was the biggest offender when it came to espionage, but after the last war, they had been weakened significantly, in particular by the Yellow Flash, and since had adopted a more isolationist and defensive approach while they recovered. Now, Kumo was the global aggressor. So, tomorrow I hear that you have your first mission with the captain, Tenzo continued, keeping the conversation going as they continued to have nothing to do. Izumi nodded. Yes. The captain told me that we've been assigned with guarding Lord Hokage. Ah. That's arguably the most important mission that we have, you know. It says a lot that the captain would already trust you in doing so at such an early point in your career. Izumi was about to thank her new comrade for the praise, but was forced to stop when he tensed up and raised a hand that immediately signaled to her that something was going on. Perceptive as she was, it took very little time for Izumi to notice it as well, a fairly sizable wagon that had been stopped by what appeared to be a squad of Konoha police. The police stopping people all the way out here is unusual, Tenzo whispered before turning to Izumi. Wait here and listen in on them. I'm going to get in closer. After getting a nod of approval from his comrade, Tenzo silently went through a string of hand seals before he astonishingly began to meld with the tree branch that they had been perched on. Her Sharingan had been active as she observed him, so she was able to tell that the jutsu was not the same as the hiding in the surface jutsu that she regularly witnessed Tonari using. It was different, and unlike anything she had ever seen before. Still, as professional as she was, Izumi was able to push her curiosity to the side and follow the order that she had been given. She focused entirely on the conversation that was taking place just a little off into the distance, and after a short while of blocking out any and all other noise, she was finally able to hear what they were saying. As I said before, it's dangerous being a merchant these days, she heard the squad commander remark as the other police officers began searching the wagon. You never know what might happen, so it's always better to be proactive. You know. Izumi was immediately able to recognize the officer that was speaking as Yashiro Uchiha, a very respected member of the clan and a high-ranking member of the Konoha police force. Among the rest of the squad, she was also able to recognize Anabe Uchiha and Teka Uchiha, who were a bit on the younger side when compared to their comrade, but were equally admired for their abilities. What are you getting on about? The merchant asked, clearly not satisfied at being stopped. Time was money, after all. It was Anabe that then spoke. Among all of the 5 great shinobi nations, it is our land of fire that is the richest and most powerful, and at the center of that power lies Konohagakure. There is a reason that you come here to sell your goods, after all. So we're simply saying that it would be a shame if you were to be turned away before ever reaching the gates, Teka remarked, continuing where Anabe left off. The safest and most lucrative market in the world, and you wouldn't be allowed to sell your goods there. Izumi wasn't liking what she was hearing, not one bit. It was obvious that her fellow clansmen were attempting to leverage their power in order to try and shake down the merchant for a cut of his earnings. It was a tactic typically used by members of organized crime factions that would tax all businesses in their territory, and if someone refused to pay, they weren't allowed to do business anymore. That, or they were taught a lesson. It's the cost of doing business in this village, Yashira explained. 9% of whatever money you make selling in this village is bumped up to us, and in exchange, we let you in. That's bullshit. The merchant shouted in justifiable anger, but was stopped when Anabe disappeared in a flash of speed and appeared mere inches away from his face. You could just turn back around and go sell elsewhere, he advised with a grin. But I think we both know that even when giving up 9% of your earnings you'd still make far more money in our village than anywhere else. And if you think that they don't have a similar tax going on in the other villages, then that's just wishful thinking on your part. The merchant, an older man, likely closer to 60 than 50, could only stand there hopelessly as he realized that there was honestly nothing he could do. In the end, he could only manage a defeated nod, which appeared satisfactory enough. The other officers, who during the conversation were searching through the contents of the wagon, finally left it alone, and the merchant was finally allowed to leave. However, before riding off, he offered some parting words. Back home, people always spoke about how Konoha was different. They welcomed outsiders and promoted just and fair treatment of the innocent. I guess they were wrong. You're no different. Just the same. The Uchiha officers hardly appeared concerned with his opinion, and ushered the man along. At this point, Izumi had seen quite enough and decided that this offense was clearly one that warranted an immediate arrest. However, before she could do so, something gripped her ankle, stopping her in place. When she looked down, she was surprised to see a hand protruding from the branch. Shortly after, Tenzo emerged from the tree, similarly to how he disappeared. What are we waiting for? Izumi inquired softly. What more is there to see? This is a sensitive matter, as I'm sure you know, Tenzo explained, and as he did Izumi noted that the Uchiha police were now gone. This is something that should be brought to Lord Hokage's attention first. We already identified who they are, and they don't know that they were being watched. There's no rush, so we should be as careful as possible. Izumi supposed he was right. The last thing that was needed was for relations between the village and the Uchiha clan to degrade even further. Arresting Yashira, Anabi, and Tekka there and now was undoubtedly the right thing to do, but it would both anger the clan and only further blemish the reputation of the Uchiha clan and the police as a whole. Nevertheless, it left a sour taste in her mouth, watching them get away. Nevertheless, as usual, Izumi reined in her emotions and did as she was told. It was weird seeing the Hokage looking so serious. Throughout all of her life, Izumi had always viewed the leader of her village as a sort of grandfatherly figure. He was always compassionate and easygoing, even when handing out dangerous missions. Now, however, upon hearing the bad news that Izumi and Tenzo had just brought him, he was almost entirely unreadable as he stared out of the window in thought. Lord Hokage, for all we know, similar demands are being made of all of the merchants coming in and out of the village, Kakashi explained, having been one of the few people that had been led in the loop. Tenzo had felt that it was best to bring the information to the captain first, seeing as circumventing him and going straight to the Hokage would be a violation of the chain of command. When he heard the news, his posture immediately looked even more slumped and tired than it normally did, and it was clear that he fully understood the possible repercussions of this new information. I am aware of that possibility, Kakashi, the Hokage remarked, his gaze still fixed outside. Oddly enough, his voice was almost casual, as if none of this was fazing him at all. I am very much aware. Silence then reigned. It was an awkward silence, and Izumi began to shuffle her feet despite herself. This conversation, this situation, it all felt so beyond her. The consequences of this new information could reverberate throughout the entire village, affecting anyone and everyone. They needed to think carefully about what they were going to do. The Hokage then finally swiveled his chair back around to face them and sighed. In truth, I almost wish that this would have never come to my attention, he revealed. I've had suspicions of such activity for quite some time, but it was always easier to simply ignore the possibility and pray that my gut feeling was wrong. If I never confirmed my suspicions, I'd never have to take action. I suppose that was easier. No one else in the room spoke as the Hokage spoke. This entire situation was painting the Hokage as more of a vulnerable figure than Izumi had previously believed him to be. For the first time, she viewed him as the human being that he was, rather than the indomitable pillar that held the entire weight of the village on his shoulders. Tell me, young Izumi, he continued as he stood his old and weary body out of his chair. What do you suppose should be done about all of this? To say that Izumi was shocked at being called on would be an understatement. Even Kakashi and Tenzo couldn't help but raise their brows at the Hokage's question. It was quite strange to see the Hokage appearing as though he wasn't entirely sure about what decision he was going to make. Even more peculiar was that he valued the opinion of someone that had so little experience. I suppose we should initiate an investigation of our own before we take any drastic action, Izumi proposed. Outwardly, she appeared unfazed by what was going on, but deep in her chest, her heart was pounding under the pressure of being forced to make such a decision. It only made her wonder if the Hokage had to feel this way every day. The Hokage merely nodded silently at the proposal before glancing to Kakashi, apparently desiring for him to weigh in and offer his opinion as well. For a moment, Kakashi didn't notice the gaze, but as soon as he did gave a casual thumbs up, apparently approving of Izumi's assessment. Right now we'd only have a case against the one squad, he said. Until we do some digging, we can't be sure of whether or not this is simply a couple of corrupt officers or if it's traceable back all the way to the top. The top. Upon hearing Kakashi's words, Izumi immediately felt her heart sink down into her stomach. Her father was the top of the Uchiha police force. The very thought of him being complicit in extortion was something that she was finding very difficult to swallow. For all of his flaws, her father was an honorable man. He valued law and order, and he respected both. He wasn't the kind of man that would sanction this, was he? It would seem that I have much to think about, the Hokage remarked tiredly, and with an almost weary smile. I'm sorry that you three must share in the stress of this matter. Especially you, Izumi. I imagine this must all be incredibly difficult for you. Izumi immediately shook her head, I understand my duty, Lord Hokage, she declared calmly. I'm not one to ignore a problem in order to pretend that it doesn't exist. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that the village emerges from this predicament unscathed. Her answer seemed to satisfy the Hokage, whose smile became far more genuine for a brief moment as he was assured of Izumi's loyalty. Personally, he trusted her as much as he did any of his other subordinates, but it was impossible to ignore the fact that she was currently being put in a challenging position. Because, despite the fact that she was wise beyond her years, she was still a member of the Uchiha clan, so asking her to side against them to any degree was something that the Hokage wasn't sure he was comfortable doing. Very well, he said after an intake of breath. You are all dismissed. Once he was left alone, the Hokage sat back down and turned to stare out of the window once more. This news was coming almost immediately after he'd set another pair of Anbu to infiltrate Kumogakure, so prior to being made aware of this possible corruption in the police force, he'd already had quite a lot on his plate. It was moments like this that he wished Minato was still alive. He had no doubt that his predecessor would be handling all of this much better. Old age has made me weak, he remarked to himself solemnly as he watched the evening sun sink below the trees and the village become enveloped by darkness. Dinner at the Uchiha household was a standard affair. Lengthy bouts of silence that would occasionally be interrupted by a question or a comment, typically from Makoto. Now, however, the silence carried even more weight than it usually did, as everyone couldn't help but notice the empty chair at the table. It had been a couple of days since Naruto left on his mysterious mission, and despite not being one that would be considered the life of the party, he was surely missed. Mother, when will Big Brother be back? Sasuke asked after picking at his food. He said that he was going to help me with my Shuriken Jutsu and then he just left. I'm not sure, Sasuke, Makoto confessed, but then a small smile passed over her face. Why don't you ask your big sister for help? Izumi nearly chuckled when Sasuke glanced at her with thinly veiled skepticism. When compared to his idol, Naruto, even his big sister couldn't compare. Yeah but, Sasuke began before leaning toward his mother and whispering. But she's a girl. Makoto leaned back in her chair and raised her brows, and girls don't know how to throw shuriken. Is that what you're saying? Well, yeah, he sputtered in response. They can't throw shuriken better than Big Brother can. Nah, Mito shouted, inserting herself into the conversation. You need a big brain to throw shuriken, and girls have bigger brains than boys. Then how come you have some of the worst shuriken jutsu scores in class? You dummy, Sasuke countered before sticking his tongue out tauntingly, sparking Mito's ire. Izumi took this as her moment to zone out, as she was smart enough to realize that this would mark the beginning of one of Sasuke and Mito's infamous arguments. She subtly shifted her attention to her father, who also seemed to be ignoring the theatrics in favor of enjoying his meal. He sat, unaware of her gaze, unaware of the thoughts that were chaotically raging throughout her head. Did he know? Was he aware of the illegal tax being enforced on merchants entering the village? If not, his subordinates were betraying his trust and displaying an apparent lack of respect for his authority. If he did know about it, that would make him responsible, and even worse, it raised the possibility that they were doing this under his orders. The very thought set her teeth on edge. Eventually, her father perked up and looked towards her, finally aware that she had been staring at him for some time. For a moment, the two stared into each other's eyes, with neither blinking or relinquishing any ground. At this moment, Izumi felt as though she was peering into his soul, and yet, even then she was unsure of what she was truly looking at. For the first time in her life, she questioned what kind of man her father truly was. Is everything all right, Izumi? Her father then asked, his voice stern and serious, as always. It was clear that he was able to sense that something was amiss. Did something happen today? Izumi's mind was racing at a mile a minute. If her father wasn't involved, then he deserved to know of the corruption brewing within the police force. But, if he did know, then telling him anything would only make an investigation of the matter impossible. She felt as if her body was being torn in two as she was forced to choose between her loyalty to the clan and her loyalty to the village. It was an impossible decision, but in the end, she made her choice. No, father.